Welcome to the Fantasy Fangirls Podcast, where two sisters dive deep into beloved fantasy lore, characters, themes, theories, and more.
Who's ready for episode 9? I can't sit still. I'm so excited. Today, we are continuing our journey with A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas, where we're covering chapters 51 through 55, aka the most highly anticipated part of a book we've ever covered. But first, let's all take a deep breath because, as always, we need to do our due diligence with our content warning. While we're focusing today's discussion on chapters 51 through 55 and book 2, we are going to bring in themes, foreshadowing, lore, and other insights across the entire ACOTAR series. These deep dives do not, however, include spoilers for the rest of Sarah J. Maas's series, except at the end of every episode where we include our Maasverse Madness segment. We'll give a big old spoiler warning beforehand, so if you haven't read the rest of the Maasverse, you can leave the episode right there, no worries at all, or you can keep listening for Throne of Glass and /Horror Crescent City crossover callouts.
So, with all of that said, if you don't know why this chapter is such a big deal, literally leave. We are not going to ruin this for you. Go finish this marvelous series, and we will be the dangling carrot for you when you're done.
Next up, we at Fantasy Fangirls are adults who say adult things about adult books. In other words, friends, this podcast is really rated R today.
There is an entire chapter-long sex scene with multiple bang, bang, bangity bangs in that scene. So you know what you're getting yourself into. Please be mindful of little listening ears today, especially.
And of course, with summer in full swing, we're so excited to be podcast partners at several live events.
We are going to be at LeakyCon in Portland, Oregon this July 5th through 7th. You can get your tickets for 10% off in the link in the show notes. We heard what day our live show is going to be. We are going to be doing an all things Empyrean live show on Saturday. We're so excited.
And then we'll be at the Dragon Gauntlet event in Boyne City, Michigan this August 16th and 17th. We're hosting a live show at both of these events, like Nicole said, and we're participating in tons of other activities, panels, sessions, you name it. We are there, meet and greet, all the great stuff.
Links to both LeakyCon and the Dragon Gauntlet are in the show notes. Plus, we have special extra discount codes for both of these events to our lovely Patreon members. So be sure to head to your Patreon portal for more details.
Speaking of which, if you love Fantasy Fangirls and this ACOMAF journey we are on together, if you want more content, more community, more events, and more, please do check out our Patreon.
We have 2 membership tiers that you can join. The Valkyries, which includes access to our Boppin' Discord, live Q&As from Lexi and I, community events, book club, promo codes for live events, plus a 20% off discounted and exclusive merch store, all for $5 a month. Or you can join the High Fae for $10 a month, which includes access to everything from the Valkyrie level, plus ad-free episodes, our full episode outlines. Yes, this one is going to be extra special long today for sure, and special voting privileges as well. Again, that is for $10 a month.
This Friday, June 21st, our book club meeting will be extra special because we have author Pen Cole joining us as we discuss her absolutely fantastic book, Spark of the Everflame. Literally, Nicole and I cannot stop devouring this series. It is brilliant, and we are so excited to have Pen Cole join us.
This was not the week for us to get obsessed with a new series because we had such a big episode, but you and I were both like, oh my God, this Kindred Curse, like, it's so good. I love this
so good.
So
if you're interested in joining our Patreon, we do also have annual memberships available where you can get approximately 2 months free. Join the party at patreon.com/fantasyfangirls. The link is also in the show notes or YouTube caption, depending where you're tuning in right now. And really and truly, friends, thank you so much for supporting us on our independent podcast as we've turned this dream into our livelihood. It means the absolute world to us, and we appreciate you so much.
And now it is time to weep into a microphone for several hours.
Nicole is going to open this discussion with a summary of what happens in chapters 51 through 55. So gather round, friends. We need an Inner Circle Debrief.
Chapter 51. A still very injured Rhys and fuming Feyre winnow into Windhaven, and Feyre immediately leaves his ass in the mud. In case you didn't know, she's still pissed that Rhys didn't tell her this small information about them being mates. Begging Moore to take her somewhere far away, they went out to a cabin in the mountains that only family is allowed to enter. But Feyre's got that VIP mate pass, which grants her access. Moore leaves Feyre to cabin solitude. Chapter 52. Feyre takes a few days to self-reflect on her feelings about primarily protecting Rhys. Yep, that was the mating bond yesterday. About her guilt around leaving Tamlin and how she didn't need to have that dead-ass weight. How she feels bad for leaving Rhys in the mud, and how she maybe should have let him explain himself before she became his worst nightmare of someone who sees all of him and then walks away. Hindsight and all that. Halfway through the day, homegirl gets a little stir crazy and starts snooping through the house, which is honestly very on brand for Feyre. She finds some paints and gets to work on putting her own interpretive spin on decorating the cabin. Honestly, I did not know this book was going to be turned into an episode of Extreme Makeover Home Edition, but here we are. Moore arrives bringing food, reflection, and her own painting skills to this HGTV special, Chapter 53. Moore leaves the next day, and thus begins a 5-day stretch of Feyre in cabin solitude. Honestly, I would have either left having found Nirvana or in need of a straitjacket, and there is no in between.
I would have loved this so much. Like, I would have loved this.
I would have lost my mind. Feyre leaning more towards the former, however, thinking about her future as part of this Inner Circle family, working in Valaris, teaching art, laughing with Rhys. Finally, a future she can hope for. And then there's a knock on the door. Chapter 54. Rhys is standing in the doorway, freezing, having flown all the way here. After admiring Feyre's new Bob Ross interpretation, she offers to heat up some soup for Rhys, which because it turns out that a female offering a male food means that she accepts the mating bond. So Feyre cuts him a deal, tell her everything, and she will decide at the end if she accepts the mating bond. The secret ingredient to this soup is truth. Finally, a la cuisine. Feyre is getting a home show special and a cooking show special all in the same chapter stretch. Girl's agent is working overtime. Rhys accepts her deal and dives into his High Lord's tale. About getting captured by Amarantha, about the start of his time under the mountain, about these visions he was having about this woman, about sneaking away to a hilltop to meet her far away, and how he learned that this woman was indeed his mate. And so this 35-minute chapter will become a 2.5-hour podcast. At the end of Rhys's story, he confesses he loves her, and Feyre gives him the soup. Chapter 55. Good soup, Feyre. After, and only after, Rhys eats all of this Michelin star soup, Feyre tells him that she loves him too, and that she is honored to be his mate. And mate bang, makety bang. I said a mate bang. Signed, sealed, delivered. I'm yours. The mating bond officially snaps into place. Both covered in each other and paint, they go to the bath and discuss next steps for their mating bond verification. Gotta get that blue check mark. But being naked together in the bath stirs up the hots for each other again and again. Bang, bangity bang. I said bang, bangity bang. Feyre, riding cowgirl, begins to glow with happiness and drowns out all of their darkness. But these sex-addled bunnies need sustenance. Someone get them a power bar. Over food, they discuss future offspring, and Feyre admits that she wants to live and have Rhys all to herself first before they bring kids into this world. Nick says, hold my baby beer. Rhys, however, breaks the news to Feyre that they've heard back from the queens, and it's time to leave for Feyre's family estate tomorrow and show them Valaris. But they're not done. One more time. Bang, bangity bang. I said bang, bangity bang. Chapter 55, everyone.
It's not just Rhys and Feyre who need to keep that stamina up. All of us need to nourish our bodies to feel our best so we can do our best in everything we do on the daily. For instance, I'm always juggling the podcast and being a mom, which means I need an easy, all-in-one way to support my gut health, boost my focus, and keep me energized. I first gave AG1 a try because I was honestly struggling with all of that, making me feel even more stressed. Since drinking AG1 daily, I felt a noticeable difference in my day-to-day health as I feel my body getting the nutrients it craves. My tummy is happier and no more sluggishness.
That is because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continually refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health.
Jake and I start every morning with our AG1. It has become so ingrained in our morning routines. He always makes me one, and I just love it so much. It's the little things, right? And when either of us travels now, we make a point to bring our AG1 travel packs. I kid you not, Jake is always gushing about how AG1 gives him energy and makes him feel ready to tackle the day. And once we ran out of it and our new delivery hadn't come yet, and he was stressed. Like, he was like, what do I do without this? Don't worry, it's coming tomorrow. I promise.
If there is one product we had to recommend to elevate your health, it is AG1. That's why we are so excited that AG1 is a partner with Fantasy Fangirls. If you want to take ownership over your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/FFG. That is drinkag1.com/FFG. Check it out.
Now it's really time to step into the cauldron and discuss key insights, character analysis, foreshadowing, theories, and so much more. Oh my goodness, Nicole, I can't believe we're finally here covering this stretch of the series. Like, oh my goodness, we're here. We've arrived.
I just want to pull back the curtain real quick, because when Lexi and I sat down to do this chapter stretch, like, you know, when you've done enough of these episodes, we're like, okay, like it's just another week. We're going into the da-da-da. We were stressing this week because it's so highly anticipated, and we really wanted to do it due diligence. And you know what, Lexi? I'm very proud with what we have created, and we cannot wait for you all to listen.
Well, let's dive in. First, let's talk about part 3 and the meaning of House of Mist. We previously talked about the significance of the first 2 parts of this book and their names, the House of Beasts and its representation of Tamlin and being trapped in the Spring Court. Then part 2, the House of Wind and how it reflects freedom, found family, and Feyre's healing journey. And finally, we're at the third and final part of this book, the House of Mist. The word mist especially draws the reader's attention because, of course, this book is named A Court of Mist and Fury. However, House of Mist is not so cut and dry with the literary analysis as the first 2 parts, and it can be interpreted in multiple ways. Quick shout out to our Discord for helping me walk through this analysis. You all are amazing. I'll be honest, I originally thought it actually referred to Hybern, and I assumed the island of Hybern was shrouded in mist. But when I did my ebook search, there was no such description. So crossing that off the list of possibilities, I don't know how I had that in my head. There's the general understanding that the House of Mist refers to the mountain cabin, but I'd like to take this concept a few steps further. In chapter 55, Feyre goes to kiss Rhys and he tastes of smoke, mist, and dew. I also have the obligation to say that Rhys, of course, is associated with misting people, though I don't feel like this refers to him in that literal sense. I believe one interpretation of House of Mist is that Rhys is home, as Feyre realizes in chapter 54. What's more, Feyre winnowing is described as her becoming, quote, mist and shadow. This is also how wraiths are described. And what are Nuala and Caradwyn? Spies. What does Feyre become at the end of this book? A spy. So House of Mist can also represent Feyre coming into her power, both with her magical abilities and becoming High Lady of the Night Court. Plus, layer that in with Rhys being her home, who is also associated with Mist in varying ways. She's welcomed as an official new member of the Inner Circle family, who are all indeed shrouded in metaphorical mist with their mystery and the secrets of Velaris. So there is my interpretation of House of Mist.
Well, and let's also not forget that Velaris itself is a place that does have mist. So maybe there is kind of that connection also to Velaris and like how this is like officially become her home there.
Yes. Yep, exactly. All right, now back to our story. There's a lot of lead up to the pinnacle chapter 54, and we would be remiss if we didn't go on this emotional journey with Feyre as she processes the earth-shattering news that she and Rhys are mates. We pick up right where we left off last episode, with Rhys winnowing the 2 of them back to Windhaven. Rhys, still very much injured, is moaning Feyre's name as she leaves him lying in the mud. Let's just say this was definitely not how he pictured her finding out about them being mates would go down. Cassian and Mor run out of the house, and I love this little detail about how Cassian quickly scans Feyre to check that she's in one piece before heading toward Rhys. Mor, however, registers that something is not okay with Feyre by looking at her face. Call it a girl's instinct that Mor, not Cassian, recognizes something's up emotionally instead of physically. Love that little nod to their girl friendship.
Same, definitely. Feyre goes to Mor and tells her that she needs to get away to, quote, have space and quiet and calm. From this little segment of that inner monologue, she knows she's not leaving for good by any means. She's leaving to get some distance to think about what this means for her and her immortal life. We here listening to this podcast are not immortal, most likely. So it's easy for us to forget about the centuries that lay looming in front of her and that she's been dreading this entire book. She now has information that changes the course of her life no matter what she does with it. And also, I want to point out that even after the mountain fight, Rhys is the one who stayed away from Feyre because he needed time to think and be away from her for a second. Was she injured and lying in the mud on the mountaintop? Maybe not. Definitely no. But he was hurt by her words, and Feyre here is hurt by his actions. Mor takes Feyre's hand and vanishes, which we need to highlight that this is no small thing for Mor to do. She is third in command of the Night Court, and he is her High Lord. But she's also going against her cousin and friend and family of 500 years. And just as Cassian and Az and Amren all push back on Rhys and disobey his orders, sometimes I'll say it's to the benefit, and sometimes it's with huge costs, looking at Cassian's major injury in ACOWAR. But this is Mor choosing family over duty. And I do wonder what it was like when she came back and refused to share the information with Rhys where she took Feyre, because we learn later that Rhys was pissed at Mor when she comes back after winnowing Feyre away. And I can't even begin to imagine, but I can say with full confidence that was not a pretty conversation.
Well, while yes, he is pissed at her, I think he also really understood why Mor didn't tell him where Feyre was. And perhaps I think he even respected her decision to be loyal to Feyre.
I think logically he felt that, yes. But I think he is so charged up emotionally right now where that would have clouded his logic.
I agree, but I don't think it was like a Nesta pissed off sort of.
Oh, no.
I have to say, Mor does an excellent job as the middleman or woman. Remember that Mor has her own estate elsewhere in the Night Court, Athelwood, which she has never mentioned to, quote, the others, which I interpret as the Inner Circle being included in these others. It's never mentioned among the Inner Circle. Being as powerful as she supposedly is, I assume Athelwood is also warded in a fairly safe place. She could have taken Feyre there where Rhys would not find her, but instead, Mor took her to the cabin where Rhys will guess where Feyre is. So no, she's not telling Rhys where Feyre is, but she's taking her to a place he'll easily figure out that's where she is. Mor also balances respecting Feyre's wishes about being here by herself and being a voice of reason to stick up for Rhys. She gives Feyre her privacy and also keeps her company when it's wanted. In a few days, when she returns to the cabin, she'll tell Feyre that she should talk to him, make him stew over it, yeah, but hear him out because Rhys always has his reasons and he's usually right about his instincts. And then she'll ask a profound question that helps Feyre get clarity in her answer. Is it so bad to be his mate, to be part of our court, our family, tangled history and all?
We appear at a cabin high up and tucked in between two mountain peaks, and the house is warded. No one can winnow into the cabin itself, not even Mor, Feyre, Rhys, anyone. So there's a ward perimeter around the cabin. Only family and those with permission can walk past the wards, which includes Feyre because she is Rhys's mate. And this cabin is very House of Wind BFF vibes is what I got from it. It's spelled to take care of you. Food landing on the countertops, a never-ending fire, clothes, hot baths that never run out of hot water. When can I... Oh, that also give you like bath salts and like different bath accessories. Like, when can I move in? This is a dream.
I would live here in an absolute heartbeat. Like, this cabin is just calling my name.
Here's my only thing, though. I would live here, but I would either need a buddy or my earphones, because if I'm just there with my own thoughts, I'm leaving in a straitjacket. That's for sure. This would also, side note, this would be the perfect reading retreat. Lauren, book huddle. Let's go. Let's do it. When Mor mentions Rhys by name, it causes Feyre to cringe, which, again, is a very relatable moment for our girl Feyre. You know that feeling when you have a big fight with someone, whether it's a relationship or even just a friend, and a different person brings them up and you feel like your stomach is basically falling out of your butt. Like, that's what this is right here. Feyre asks Mor not to tell Rhys where she is, and Mor responds with, quote, "It's not my business," which Feyre cuts her off, and then she says, quote, "Then don't say anything," which Mor does ignore. This is a very family moment, and also I'll call it a friend and family moment. One person asking, hey, like, please don't talk about this, and the other seeing that they are being their worst enemy. There's a difference between putting up a boundary of saying, like, hey, I really don't want to talk about this, and saying, hey, I don't want to talk about this, but the other person realizing, oh, you're really just getting in your own way here. Which I do want to say pause, because after all of the butting into business, other people's business that Feyre has done, I think Mor has every right to say her piece here, in my opinion. Feyre dismisses Mor and she winnows away, telling Feyre that she'll be back in just a few days. So alone, Feyre stands in silence. Over the next few days, Feyre goes through a very transformational retreat. It all starts with her being completely bogged down by this anger, resentment, betrayal when it comes to Rhys. Last episode, we discussed Feyre's initial anger at Rhys, how she trusted him to tell her the truth and no longer keep secrets. And as she reflected in chapter 50 that we covered last episode, he was the one person who helped her repair her heart over the last few months. And that was with the foundation of trust and friendship long before anything romantic happened between them. She is angry with him because when she first got with Tamlin, this was basically the start of it. There was a huge piece of information that was being hidden from her. It feels like this again, where she's being left in the dark. It feels like history is repeating itself. I don't think that is the whole reason why she's angry, obviously, but I do think that's a huge part of it. And she's also been beating herself up for months for wanting Rhys. Oh, like when her and Tamlin had, quote, just broken up, which I've discussed on the podcast, how that's subjective. When Rhys was her mate all along. Feyre is a very tunnel vision anger person. When someone pisses her off, she does not see the bigger picture. She doesn't see their side, none of it. She is most definitely not thinking about how she promised she would never walk away from him. That's for sure. But here, alone in the cabin, her anger does begin to shift. Quote, my wedding day. Had he interrupted to spare me from a horrible mistake or for his own ends? Because I was his mate and letting me bind myself to someone else was unacceptable? She goes on to think that maybe he didn't even care that she was sharing a bed with Tamlin for months, or maybe he didn't even want this mating bond and he would hope it would vanish. She was not ready to hear him out when she left him in the mud, and so this second guessing all of these moments they've shared together, jumping to negative conclusions, it's all fueled by this anger, and I'll even say it's fueled by the unknown. When we don't know things, we tend to jump to conclusions, and our brain is not our best friend in that moment, for sure. And again, this is a very relatable character moment. It would be so unlike Feyre if she found out that he was her mate and she was like, yay, fantastic, I'm so excited. She needed to have this moment of rage at what's been kept from her for about 6 months. Her thoughts begin to shift and opening up the tunnel vision just a little bit wider. What if he did tell her, especially when she was in love with Tamlin? Quote, it didn't excuse him not telling me, didn't excuse the recent weeks when I'd hated myself so much for wanting him so badly, when he should have just told me, but I understood. We'll talk more about that I understood language in a second, because here are the big kickers. She is mad at herself and him, yes, for being so hung up on guilt and shoulds that we've been calling out like crazy in Feyre's inner monologue. She's felt so guilty for falling in love with him over these past few weeks. She realizes that she didn't need to feel all that guilt and heaviness all along. Again, a very relatable moment. But I do want to explore this question here. What if Rhys did tell her when she was in love with Tamlin, or at least I'll say when she was hung up on Tamlin, because he learned that he, meaning Rhys, learned this mating bond was real under the mountain. So let's just say he told her on that mountainside balcony after everyone was freed. Feyre was so hollow and so lost at that time. This would not have helped her find a path. It would have made it more confusing for her. So then let's say he told her when he picked up her for night court bargain visit number 1. For 3 months, Feyre was wasting away, and there would have been similar obstacles to the ones above. Her feeling hollow, it would have confused her more. But also for 3 months, Rhys and the Night Court became the looming monster over the Spring Court's lives. No one spoke of him, but they judged the tattoo. They feared what would happen to Feyre when the inevitable would come. So through osmosis, Rhys became the High Lord of the Night Court again to her. If he told her, it most certainly would not have gone well. So it's a lose-lose situation no matter what. You wait and don't tell her, and she gets to heal, but she also doesn't get to know this huge piece of information, and the conflict with the Spring Court would continue to grow. We can't overlook that. Or you tell her and the conflict with the Spring Court might dissipate, but I'm actually going to argue that I think Tamlin would have become more unhinged if he learned that they're mates. Based off of how he acts at the end of this book when he does learn that they're mates. She also would get to know earlier, yes, but would Feyre have taken that information well? Because I don't think so. She needed to heal her view of Rhys, so she didn't view him as the under the mountain version of Rhys anymore.
I'll also add in there too, she needed to get past Tamlin as well. And that was a huge part of this journey too, was being able to let Tamlin go for her own sake, not because of Rhys, not because of them being mates, not because she was in love with him, but because she personally could not be with Tamlin for their own own separate reasons.
Well, I'll even go as far to say, yes, she needed to heal her view of Rhys. She needed to heal her relationship or lack thereof with Tamlin. She also needed to heal her relationship and view of herself, because she viewed herself as a monster at the beginning of this book, and Rhys still had remnants of monster in her view, or at least in her point of sight of him. I feel like she would have seen their mate equalness as just that, two monsters coming together, and it would have tainted their love story, viewing it more as a punishment for what she did under the mountain instead of a love story.
Yes, exactly.
Quick shout out to Claritin for sponsoring this episode and providing us with some samples. There is nothing worse than allergies stopping me in my tracks. I just want to shake my fist at the sky. Being the high achiever perfectionist that I am, I always want to be on the go, go, go. But allergies make me feel so sluggish and miserable. Luckily for those of us who live with the symptoms of allergies, we can live Claritin Clear with Claritin D.
I struggle so much with seasonal allergies. My eyes get itchy. I wake up with a stuffy nose every morning, and I just feel so icky even when I'm not sick. But Claritin D saves the day every day by treating those dreaded allergies. Designed for serious allergy sufferers like me, Claritin D has 2 powerful ingredients in just one pill that relieve your allergy symptoms and decongest your nose so you can breathe better. This double action combination of prescription strength allergy medicine and the best decongestant available relieves sneezing, a runny nose, itchy and watery eyes, an itchy nose and throat, and sinus congestion and pressure, all with ease.
Ready to live life as if you do not have allergies? It's time to live Claritin Clear. Fast and powerful relief is just a quick trip away. Find Claritin D at the pharmacy counter. Ask for Claritin D at your local pharmacy counter. You don't even need a prescription. Go to Claritin.com right now for a discount so you can live Claritin Clear. Use as directed.
As Feyre asks herself these questions Nicole was just mentioning and processes through that initial anger, she starts to admit that she understands why Rhys did what he did. And after that realization, we see a gradual shift in her POV that reflects the ultimate truth within herself that she does love him and wants to be his mate too. For instance, while the cabin is warm, the sheets are cold. She's missing him warming the sheets for them. And the bed is large but empty, showing how she does wish he was beside her. And throughout these chapters, she keeps thinking to herself, mate, my mate. Like she's testing the title, letting it settle into her mind as she processes all of this. She thinks how she walked away from him a day after she told him he was the only thing she'd never walk away from.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, Feyre. We've already talked about this. Moving on. And she realizes maybe she shouldn't have. Captain Hindsight 2020.
There's so much like a wave of guilt that's associated with it. And like I said, she's a very tunnel vision thinker. She was angry, all that kind of stuff. But is this an L for Feyre? Are we giving Feyre an L in this chapter stretch, or is this not quite an L?
I think that based on her needing to have that space and having to process, her leaving him in the mud to go run away was a mini L there.
Okay.
Like, again, understanding her reasoning why. And I think the bigger L is that she told him that she was going to not ever leave him, and then she walked away. That's where the L really lies.
Well, and we also need to remember she is, 20? Yeah, she's 20. So would I have done this when I was 20? Probably. So I do. Yes, I think a lowercase L is an appropriate stamp.
Quote, I demanded honesty, and at the first true test, I hadn't even let him give it to me. This is why chapter 54 is so pivotal for these two, because after it, all the truths are laid out on the table. All the secrets are out, so they can truly start their next chapter together as mates, as lovers in a relationship. She thinks about the family because, why, yes, this is mostly about Rhys and her being mates. This also includes truly being part of their family. She's never quite had this kind of loving, tight-knit family. She stopped expecting it over the years. Remember how she grew up in the formality of a manor and then had that again at the spring court. The spring court is literally the opposite of the night court of this cabin and the Inner Circle family. And she didn't realize how much she wanted to be part of a family until she discovered one and how they can live and love together. In a few days, she'll begin imagining a future. All book, Feyre didn't know what she wanted in her future. The unknown felt scary and and uncomfortable because she didn't know where she belonged, how she fit in anywhere. But now, as she's processing through all of this and really starting to come to accept what this magnitude means, she's envisioning their life, spending quiet, fun time here at the cabin, to coming home at the end of the days in Valaris, finding purpose and fulfillment by teaching others how to paint. And Rhysand would be there to share his day too, and they'd feed each other summer berries and be together and happy and content. Quote, and there it was, a future.
Really quickly, I also want to point out that everything that she was saying in her goal, it was not romantic by nature necessarily. It was friendship and family foundationally.
Yes. As we've said many times, Feyre is a goal-oriented person, and she has felt so lost in this book because she lost her sense of purpose. She found it again in her missions and role in stopping this oncoming war, but that's short term. What about the rest of her immortal life? What is she fighting this war for? The question of what her future will look like, what she wants to envision for it, has haunted her all book. And yet now she has that clarity. Quote, a direction and a goal and an invitation. I love that word, invitation, to see what else immortality might offer me. It did not seem so listless, so empty anymore.
Many of her past goals have been solely for survival. She had the goal to keep her family alive and to keep her promise to her mother fulfilled. She had the goal to escape the spring court when she first arrived, to free the fairies under the mountain. And then when she was broken by Amarantha and the spring court was literally dictating all of her goals, she was given little goals here and there by Rhys, learning to read, getting the ring from the weaver. But now here she is seeing a goal that is so full of hope, not survival. And for once, a goal that she is choosing for herself.
And part of how she finds this clarity, Feyre finds half a dozen paint cans and, friends, she begins to paint. She paints all day and all night, up again with a brush in hand the next morning before the sun was fully up, calling back to that passion that she was so jealous that she didn't feel anymore. Well, now here it is again. There has been so much lead up to this moment as we've experienced Feyre's healing journey with her. From when this emptiness consumed her and viewing the world in color and light was non-existent, sucked out of her from under the mountain, to little flashes of what she might paint, her creativity, this passion of hers that represents life and living it, starting to flicker again, showing us and her that this artist is still within her, buried deep. But she hasn't been ready to paint yet. She told Rhys recently that she wanted to paint him, which was a very vulnerable moment for her and a turning point as she admitted out loud that she did indeed want to paint again. Before that, on Starfall, she painted the spirit on Rhys's hand and marveled at what she had just unknowingly done, paint again, which was so fitting to happen on Starfall as she came into her own in a new way with embracing life and truly living it, as we talked about so much during that episode. Now, as we talk about this, we, of course, need to address the big internet debate. Was Feyre disrespectful when she painted the cabin? Because a lot of this fandom is genuinely upset over the fact that she did this. And actually, Nicole and I don't want to speak for you, but I believe that we are in agreement that it is actually fitting for the story and these characters.
Might I remind everyone that Rhys had Nuala and Caradwyn paint her body every single night under the mountain against her will. So it feels like a fair exchange to me.
Well, that's going down a whole other, the internet fandom is mad. We're not going to open up that right now. But let's bring that back to Rhys, though, real quickly. He was warm to the story of Feyre sharing how she painted their human cottage and the dressers. Remember, last episode when he was so hurt, she was telling him the story. He knows that this is her thing, as we will definitely learn in chapter 54. And he had asked what she painted for herself. He's not weirded out by this at all, that she was telling him how she was painting the cottage. He understands why painting means so much to her. So no, Feyre painting this cabin is her putting her mark on this family who have done nothing but welcome her with open arms and help her feel comfortable, help guide her back to wanting to paint again in the first place. So yes, she's leaving her mark, but it's on a family who's like, hey, leave your mark right here. It's not like her imposing by any means. It was because there was a welcoming invitation, and part of the reason that she's able to even paint again is because of their support and love for her.
Well, and I want to talk about what the cabin itself symbolizes, which is a sole place where they all might come and be no one but themselves. What is Feyre doing right here? Being no one but herself. She is painting not only for her own creative fulfillment, but she's also painting their story. We've discussed endlessly on the pod about how the Inner Circle is becoming family to Feyre, but this is the first time she herself is saying it and realizing it.
Remember back at Starfall, that was the first time that she called them her friends.
Yes.
And now she's taking that one big step further. They're not just friends to her, they're family.
I'm in agreement with you. This feels so not only in character, but so full circle for our characters and for the family that they've created and how she's being able to showcase her creativity.
Last thing I'll note on that is that if the Inner Circle really didn't like this, I'm pretty sure they could just snap their fingers and all of the paint would go away. Like, I don't think that it is nearly as big of a deal to them as it would be to us humans if we walked into our beautiful cabin home and it was just painted. It's like, there's real context here that needs to be considered. So that's our defense of Feyre.
Think of how many magic erasers we would have to go through in order to get that off the wall. Anyway, after 5 days, Feyre has painted every single surface of this cottage. End quote. On the 5th night, there is a knock on the door. Staring at her is Rhys, which, quick side note, I love how it's described that he's looking freezing. Like, I'm sure he's pounding on the door, thunderous and impatient, because he needs to see Feyre. He needs to explain his side, yada, yada. But I also like to imagine that he's just like, I'm cold, let me in. Feyre opens the door wider, letting Rhys into the cabin, end quote. I could have sworn I felt a pulse of knee-wobbling relief through the bond. Rhys flew here not knowing if she would want to see him or not. Just like, think about the last time he saw her. She was livid with him. And while she's had this self-reflection retreat week, he doesn't know if she's been up here, having that acceptance roller coaster, or if she's been up here getting angrier and stewing in it. His greatest fear came true, as Feyre noted, someone who saw all of him and still walked away. So yeah, this knee wobbling relief sounds about right to me.
I just realized, I wonder if he's been able to feel anything through the bond. Like, has she had her mental shields up, or has he been able to kind of feel those emotions throughout the bond? It's never addressed, but just something to think about there. We don't know exactly where this mountain cabin is, but I'm guessing it is definitely not in the Illyrian mountains, but of course another mountainous terrain in the Night Court. And while Moore didn't tell him where Feyre is, he took a chance with his guests and flew here. Again, I really do think Moore brought Feyre here because she might not tell Rhys where she is, but she knew he'd figure it out pretty easily. He says, quote, "It took a while," which I interpret as several days. Like, he needed several days to recover from his injuries, and then he needed several days to fly here. Being Feyre's POV and processing everything with her this past week, we've known she's willing to hear Rhys out and that she sees a beautiful future with him. Yet when she opens the door, you immediately identify that real shift in how she describes him compared to when she was furious with him and left him in the mud. Quote, "My mate, this beautiful, strong, selfless male who had sacrificed and wrecked himself for his family, his people, and didn't feel it was enough, that he was enough for anyone." She has seen him for who he really is, and they've understood each other at their cores for a while, though she now looks at him with new appreciation and heartfelt sentiments, with a revelation that he is her mate after she's processed this and accepted it on her own. While there's a quick lighthearted moment, the magnitude of his presence weighs here, and Feyre is ready to not hide anymore. She's ready to face this conversation and Rhys head on, no dancing around the topic. She shares what's in her heart about why she didn't paint his eyes, summarizing the last several days pretty well, if I do say so myself.
Knowing that this dude is pretty hungry after flying multiple days to get to her, she offers to heat him up some food. Heat, because she cannot cook. Which, pause, when I first read this, I was like, who the hell cooked when they were at the cottage in poverty? But it does actually make sense. Prior to going into poverty, they had chefs and they had servants. So no one really knew or was learning the how to cook trade, is my guess. Then when she was at the spring court, food just magically poofed and it was there. When they went into poverty, they didn't really have very much in terms of ingredients. So they knew how to cook meat. They knew how to make jerky, but I'm assuming that's about it.
They didn't have much to truly cook beyond the absolute basics. Yes, there were vegetables to chop up or boil or whatever like that. But I'm guessing the ingredients that they did fix, it was not necessarily cooking as much as I'll say preparing for them. It does make me wonder if that was Nesta and Elaine's domain, actually. But we're not going down that road right now.
We're not. No, closing. Shut down. Feyre notices that Rhys is acting weird, not because of her lack of cooking skills. So she says, quote, I don't know the rules, so you need to explain them to me.
This calls back to our conversation last episode, where part of Feyre's embarrassment and anger at all of this is because she doesn't know much about mating bonds and doesn't have the same context as everyone else to have a chance at being in the know. Instead of being accusational, like she would have been a few days ago about not knowing the rules, now she comes from a place of simple truth and vulnerability and trust that she won't be judged for not knowing and that it's okay to ask her mate this question.
We learn that making food for a mate the first time is very, very important, going back to the beasts that they were. However, I'm guessing it's more traditional rather than like a magical solidifying aspect of the bond. Okay, sweet.
Yeah, it doesn't solidify the bond biologically like consummation does, but it remains ingrained in their culture as the way to accept the bond. Okay. Which I must say, whenever I read this, I'm always like, oh, that's convenient that Feyre offers to heat him up some food. And it's like, oh, well, actually, this is quite important. And here we go, folks. Quote, tell me the story. Tell me everything. He understood my offer. Tell me while I cooked, and I decide at the end whether or not to offer him that food. Nicole, you know that sound. It's the sound of another sale with Shopify. Shopify is the easiest way for small businesses to sell their products across the world, online, in-store, and over social media.
Shopify is a game changer for anyone who is trying to make their own small business dreams come true. It doesn't matter whether you sell online or in person, Shopify POS is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Is that you, Veritas Orb? Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what is in stock.
Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify.
Sign up for a $1 per month trial at shopify.com/FFG, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/FFG to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/FFG. Before we get into this High Lord's tale, we have to call to attention why this chapter is so famous and emotionally impactful among the fandom. ACOTAR, the series, in and of itself is a love story. It is not a fairy tale where beauty falls in love with the beast, but it is a story of a broken man in a situation without hope, love, friends, or family. And it is also the story of a shattered woman in a situation without hope, love, friends, or family. One of the reasons the story is so beautiful is because we see these two come together, embrace life together, and find hope again together. But chapter 54 is the moment we learn that this is so much bigger than a linear love story. It is the moment we learn this tale began long before chapter 1, page 1 of our story in ACOTAR, the first book. It is the moment we learn the significance of so many half sentences that we breezed over on our first read of ACOTAR. And it is also the moment we learn that this love story is so much deeper than friendship, family, and hope, but it is instead two souls coming together. One of Lexi and I's favorite book moments is when you learn something in a book that makes rereading a book or even a series a different experience. Rereading ACOTAR and ACOMAF after reading this chapter, chapter 54, it becomes a different book. It is no longer a fairy tale, but an epic love story that changed many of our lives. It enriched our own relationships, and it brought a community of all of us together. We've discussed how Sarah J. Maas took a major risk with ACOMAF, switching the love interest after many of us fell for Tamlin last book. But Sarah J. Maas knew what she was doing. Everything was leading to this moment. And you can feel it on the page from the very last description of Rhys's monologue. Quote, he leaned back, loosening a long breath. You can almost feel SJM leaning back from her computer and sighing a breath of relief, having truly stuck the landing.
We often praise how important show don't tell is for storytelling. And then there are moments like chapter 54 where telling not only has its place, but it deserves the spotlight. Feyre asks Rhys to tell her everything, and thus we the readers are leaning in to hear Rhys tell everything too, because we've assumed that he has a side to the story. But what is so masterful is what Nicole said, that his telling of his story shifts the gravity of everything leading up to this point. Rhysand, in turn, SJM, is finally laying it all out so Feyre and the reader can be fully informed. And not just informed, but learn these jaw-dropping revelations that bring all of the puzzle pieces together into a complete picture we couldn't even fathom previously. All right, friends, and with that, Rhys begins to tell her everything. And when he means everything, he truly does mean everything, including the series of events that led up to Amarantha's reign, where we get the backstory as to why he hated her so much. It all started more than 500 years ago, when Rhys's legion was captured during the war by Amarantha's army. We will learn from Jurian and ACOWAR that Rhys went against orders and marched his legion into Amarantha's fort to save Miriam. Meanwhile, Cassian and Azriel were in different legions. Remember that Rhys's father separated them because he felt threatened by these three great Illyrian warriors. Rhys was put in charge of an Illyrian legion who hated him for being a half-breed. We don't know for certain, but I'm assuming this was the same legion that was captured. Cassian was placed in a different legion as a common foot soldier, and Azriel was kept as a High Lord's personal shadow singer to be his spy and do his dirty work. During the war, they only saw each other on the battlefields, but they looked for each other's names whenever Illyrian casualty lists made their rounds. Remember too in the prologue of ACOWAR when Rhys is looking for his friends to see if they've been injured or killed on the battlefield. So Cassian and Azriel, they had no idea that their brother Rhys and his forces had been taken prisoner by Amarantha at this time. Amarantha's captains held Rhys and his legion for weeks, torturing and slaughtering his warriors. They stripped Rhys of his power by putting ash bolts through his wings and chaining him with those bluish stone chains. Remember that these chains are one of Hybern's greatest assets because they nullify a high Fae's powers, even someone as powerful as Rhys. These chains are made up of stone delved from deep in Hybern. For weeks, he was chained up between two trees, beaten and interrogated about where the Night Court forces were. To try to get him to break, Amarantha's captains tortured and killed his warriors, but Rhys refused to talk. And as he shares this with Feyre, you can feel the anguish in his voice as he speaks roughly. The pain and guilt of being unable to save his warriors still weighs on him all these centuries later. Even if they did hate him for being half Illyrian, he knew he was responsible for their torments and death, sacrificing them to save his friend Miriam and to keep the rest of the Night Court's forces hidden. He goes on to say that Amarantha's forces were too dumb to know that Rhys was an Illyrian, because the way to get him to yield would have been to try and cut off his wings. Which, pause real quickly, because this does raise a question. How did these Hybern forces not know Rhys was an Illyrian? He was the leader of an Illyrian legion, and he literally has Illyrian wings, which they've put ash bolts through. If I had to speculate, I believe the answer lies in analyzing Hybern's prejudices. Like plenty of other High Fae, Hybern thinks less of Illyrians, leading them to believe that the son of a Prythian High Lord can't possibly be Illyrian. I'm guessing that they weren't aware that the High Lord of the Night Court mated with an Illyrian. They must assume that he was using his magic to conjure, for lack of a better word, fake wings instead of those wings naturally being a part of him, or that these wings were part of his beast form. Being the son of a High Lord, that would probably mean that he would eventually have that beast form. I've also seen readers ask why Rhys didn't just make his wings disappear like we're aware he's capable of doing. And the answer is that he was indeed bound by these chains that nullify his powers, plus he's got ash bolts through his wings, making him incapable of using his magic to make his wings disappear. Back to Rhys's story about Amarantha. We learn that Amarantha didn't care that he was her prisoner. She didn't take him seriously. He was just another High Lord's son. And she was very preoccupied with the loss of her sister after Jurian killed her. Remember, Jurian was a mighty mortal army commander during the war, and he pretended to love Clythia, Amarantha's sister. She loved him with an unrelenting madness and was too blind to realize he was using her for information about Amarantha's forces. After some months, he eventually tortured and butchered her, crucifying her with ashwood so she couldn't move while he did it. And he left the pieces for Amarantha to find.
In ACOWAR, when Jurian comes out of the shadows at Lord Nolan's estate, we get some insight. He went mad after Clythia, obsessed with the end goal of freeing the army and he would do it again. He was glad to do it if it meant winning the war. Quote, I've had 500 years to think about it.
We're familiar with Amarantha's shortcomings of underestimated people who are seemingly beneath her. For instance, she never imagined Feyre to beat her 3 trials or solve the riddle's answer that was love, because she didn't think Feyre was capable of comprehending love, based again on her experience of Jurian falsely loving her sister. Well, she underestimated this High Lord's son as well, not thinking of the potential repercussions or of the power that he did indeed possess, not to mention his cunning. He's got a great mind. Because, hey, he's chained up and his powers are void, so why bother giving him a second thought? Especially when Amarantha was so hellbent on killing Jurian for what he did to her sister. Amarantha had no idea that every second, every breath, Rhys plotted her death. It's what fueled him, what kept him going when he had lost all other hope. He was willing to forfeit his life to kill her, not just willing to die while taking her down, but expecting to. Quote, I was so damned ready to make an end of it and wait for Cassian and Azriel and more on the other side. Even in his early 30s, Rhys selflessly put protecting his friends first. All he felt was rage at Amarantha and what she had done to him and his warriors, and relief that his friends weren't there to be in the line of fire with his decision to kill her and sacrifice himself in the process. The day and time were set, as Nicole says. He put it in his calendar. He was ready emotionally and strategically. Rhys doesn't do anything half-assed or without calculation. Remember, he's our Ravenclaw. But then, the day before he planned to kill Amarantha, she and Jurian faced each other on the battlefield. While chained in the mud, Rhys was forced to watch the battle that he felt should have been his. In ACOTAR, Lucian described them as wrecking an entire battlefield, using their soldiers as shields, until their forces were nearly all dead. Jurian had been gifted some protection against Amarantha, but it did not hold up against her in single combat. Amarantha won against Jurian, ripping out his eye and ripping off his finger before dragging him back to the camp, where she slowly tore him apart for days and days, though I will say in Lucian's retelling, it was weeks. Preoccupied with torturing Jurian, Amarantha refused orders to march to the King of Hybern's aid, which cost him armies and the war, partly because, being so focused on Jurian payback, Amarantha didn't detect Rhys's father's arrival at her camp. In a panic, she killed Jurian instead of see him liberated, and then she fled.
Despite rescuing Rhys, his father told his men and Azriel, who accompanied him here, to leave the ash arrows in Rhys's wings as a punishment for getting caught. I do wonder if also this is because he was worried about his son being so great and powerful, his friends also, being just the ticket to overthrow his seat as High Lord. I wonder if he thought leaving these ash arrows in his shoulders and his wings would weaken him and make him less of a threat.
That would be very possible. Just what an asshole all around. In chapter 55, when Feyre is bathing him in his wings, there's all these scars, and I always call back to this part here. The war was nearing its end. Again, this stunt of Amarantha's was a big reason for Hybern's downfall, but Rhys couldn't fight in the final battles because he was forced to return home to recover. As much as it's in Rhys's nature to be on the front lines, he couldn't risk the likelihood of never flying again. Not when he loved it so much, not when his wings meant everything to him and his true identity as an Illyrian. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the 3 Illyrians came back to this cabin Rhys and Feyre are at right now, Rhys's brothers carrying him between them due to his injuries. There is so much shared family history here throughout the centuries that makes it a forever home. How it withstands all the fights and apparently gets rebuilt after Mor and Amren burn it down. I'm very curious about that. All this sadness, all the drunk fun, all the moments throughout the years, big and small. Rhys notes how the war changed everyone in this world, as wars do, and as we will see in the aftermath of ACOWAR. Perhaps the Night Court had already abolished human slavery long before the treaty, but life after war and the changes that come with it run so deep and on such a personal level, impacted by everyone, far exceeding the societal structure change across the rest of Prythian. Cassian and Azriel stayed by Rhys's side as he roared at the stars that Amarantha would go unpunished, that the King of Hybern would go unpunished. Quote, too much killing had occurred on either side for everyone to be brought to justice, they said. I have to wonder if the humans and Fae already knew they were pushing their luck with forcing Hybern to sign the treaty. And knowing how powerful he was, it would be impossible to truly punish him for the crimes he committed without falling back into war. For whatever the reason, we have to look at the consequences of not punishing them. Amarantha, for instance, killed all of her human slaves instead of freeing them. And of course, we know that Hybern has been biding his time over these last 500 years, waiting to strike again. Some of the courts in Prythian fought alongside Hybern, like Tamlin's father, so there was a lot of emphasis placed on figuring out how to coexist in the years, decades, and centuries to follow the war. Prythian had to heal from a civil war, and it had to readjust to create space for the mortal realm, small as it may be, and learn how to live without human slaves. If times were fragile after Amarantha, as we've learned at the beginning of this book, we can only imagine how volatile society and the political structure was, and how every single person, human or fae, was impacted after this war 500 years ago. I'm not saying I agree with Rhys's father to let the bad guys go unpunished. I'm just trying to give us all perspective on the stakes of the world after the war.
We here at Fantasy Fangirls are so excited to tell you about a new podcast that celebrates the magic of fandoms in our lives. That Nerd Thing is a new podcast hosted by Morgan, a psychologist and self-proclaimed nerd, also a good friend of mine. Shouts to you, Morgan. I love you. Every episode, Morgan dives deep into fascinating conversations, interviewing guests from the arts, literary, and the entertainment world so that you can get an inside look into the nerdy interests of the very people who shape today's media. Plus, you get to find some inspiration to pursue your own passions. And surprise, I've actually been on this show. I was on Morgan's very first episode discussing romantasy.
Morgan has also chatted with a producer from Grey's Anatomy, multiple New York Times bestselling authors, Taylor Swift superfans, a record label producer, and even a Hamilton Broadway performer. She's also connected with fans and podcast hosts from the Marvel Universe, Harry Potter, Bridgerton, and more, like Nicole mentioned, including Fantasy Fangirls.
You can check out my interview on episode 1. Whether you're a diehard fan or just dipping your toes into the nerdy waters, That Nerd Thing truly has something for everyone.
Search That Nerd Thing and follow now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now so that you never miss an episode. Seriously, friends, we're so excited for Morgan and what she's achieving with That Nerd Thing, and we really, really highly recommend this podcast. Please go give it a listen.
We love you, Morgan! The beginning of Amarantha's reign in Prythian. We need to talk about it. So Amarantha returned to the shores about 400 years later, and Rhys was still in desperate, ready, to kill her. But this was a gut punch. She did not even recognize him. Amarantha, you had the High Lord's son captured. You'd think he'd be an important face to memorize. But this is so on brand for Amarantha, and it is honestly the ultimate fuck you. Rhys has been plagued by the memory of his warriors being slaughtered, her killing and torturing Jurian for 400 years. And she cannot even be bothered to remember his face. Also, I want to point out, he is one of the most powerful people in the world. He is a High Lord now. He is the most powerful High Lord in all of history. It just goes to show how little Amarantha paid attention and pays attention still to others' power because she thinks herself just almighty. For Amarantha, Rhys was just the son of the man who killed Tamlin's father. Amarantha successfully convinced the other High Lords that she wanted peace and she wanted trade between Hybern and Prythian. And after assuring them that the death of her sister had changed her, which quick pause, actually, Baron buying into this BS isn't really surprising to me, but Thiessen bought into this? That was shocking.
I agree.
I was like, Thiessen, you're better than this. Tamlin, however, did not trust Amarantha's big shift in emotions in the slightest. And despite their hatred for each other, Rhys knew that Tamlin, knew her personally and was a good judge of character. Again, here is Rhys using his Ravenclaw smarts, not trusting what he was hearing from Amarantha, but instead trusting the reactions of those who know her best.
For the next 50 years, she established trade lines between Prythian and Hybern. No one else, not even the king of Hybern and certainly not the High Lords of Prythian, knew that the same ships that brought over Hybern goods also brought over her own personal forces, because she wanted Prythian for her own, to use as a launching point to one day destroy the mortal world once and for all. After building trust with the High Lords, there was a ball thrown in her honor for all the courts to celebrate the trade agreement with Hybern, and everyone was invited, including Rhys.
So Rhys wrote in his calendar yet again a date and a time to kill Amarantha and did not tell anyone, not even his second, Amren, which honestly is wise. I feel like anyone he told, especially in the Inner Circle, would have probably convinced or at least attempted to convince to get him out of it. But considering that he was willing to go to war and die for it, I do feel like telling at least your second might have been a good idea.
And it's very on brand for Rhys. Like Tarquin said back at the summer court, he has plans he does not tell anyone about until he's completed them. And Rhys may get under Amren's skin sometimes, but she is loyal to him because she believes in him. He trusted them to handle things if he didn't survive this encounter. And he trusted them to be on his side and help him navigate the repercussions if he did survive and war broke out. But yes, that was a very big plan to keep secret even from Amren, even if it is exactly Rhys's character, and we will see this again in a major way in ACOWAR.
Boy, will we. Rhys went with the Court of Nightmares to this party, not wanting Cassian, Azriel, Mor, or Amren to witness what he was going to do.
It calls back to just a few pages ago when Rhys was explaining how he was relieved that they weren't present the first time he planned to kill Amarantha.
His plan was to wait until she was drunk, then slip into her mind, which I'm guessing shields are weakened by alcohol, and he would make her reveal all of her crimes. Then he would, quote, turn her brain into liquid before anyone could react. Rhys is smart and calculating. Have we mentioned that he is a Ravenclaw? But when it comes to revenge on Amarantha, he was so laser beam focused on the act itself rather than looking at all possible outcomes, which Rhys is famous for doing. So yes, Amarantha was beyond smart and cunning, and she had been trained extensively against Amati, so we couldn't see her plan past her thick, with multiple C's, mental shields, which he was so busy tunneling into, so laser focused on the bloodlust and his goal of destroying her, that he did not think to sniff his drink for poison. Remember back when we were in the summer court, Rhys sniffs his drink there. Then remember in the Hewn City, when he sniffed the wine for Feyre that she received from Kier. This is a mistake that he will never make again. His powers were ripped away from him due to the spell Amarantha put on their wine during the toast. Remember, she's a student of Hybern. She stole his unholy spell book.
She couldn't overtake Prythian with the 7 High Lords at full power, so she used her cunning and Hybern's spellbook to take their powers from them. The way to best describe this is she trapped their powers within the spell and the powers were tethered to her, but notably she could not use the High Lord's powers herself. That's why when she died, they all got their powers back and the spell was broken.
In Rhys's last seconds of having his powers, he shielded Valaris. He binded the shields to his friends so that they had to remain in the city and thus could not come after him to help him. He also told them mind to mind what was happening and that they need to stay away. And then he wiped the city of Valaris and the wards protecting it from the minds of the attending Court of Nightmares High Fae.
This is one of those moments that on the podcast we've questioned the consistency of info because no one in the Court of Nightmares was supposed to know about Valaris in the first place. So to kind of overcome this plot hole, we speculate he wiped his inner circle and any possible information they may have that links to Valaris because Rhys couldn't risk Amarantha getting even a whiff of its existence.
Half of these Court of Nightmares attendees, Amarantha slaughtered right then and there after they drank their wine, just to prove to Rhys that she could, and as a vengeance for Tamlin's father, who again, she was a close ally of. The half of the remaining Court of Nightmares people were the only people at his side for 50 years. People who he strongly dislikes, if even hates, and people who wildly hate him. Others under the mountain at least had members of their own court to bind together to not feel so lonely, but Rhys didn't, which only exacerbated that loneliness for him.
And of course, he had no friends among the other courts as he kept his mask on to earn Amarantha's trust and keep his true court and people protected. I will say it will be very fun to speculate his and Helian's history when we do get to their interaction in ACOWAR, because I have some theories.
Seeing her murder half of his court attendees, he knew that there was nothing he would not do to keep her from looking too long at who I was and what I loved. So Rhys told himself that this was a new war, and knowing what Amarantha's attention meant that evening, and that it wasn't so much as just wanting to fuck him, it was more about getting revenge on his father, which I'm just going to say, hasn't she done already? Like, she's done that plenty, but she wants to keep going. So Rhys took her to bed and, quote, I made her beg and scream, and I used my lingering powers to make it so good for her that she wanted more, craved more.
Like we've been saying, Rhys doesn't half-ass anything. And even when everything goes to shit, he is a chess player. His powers are mostly gone, and Amarantha has them all on a leash. So instead of giving up with his tail between his legs, he shifts his mindset and considers this a whole new kind of war, an ongoing battle of perceptions, politics, and power plays. Everything Rhys does is with purpose. He usually thinks 2 steps ahead. And while he didn't know exactly how things were going to play out, he embraced this role of the evil High Lord of the Night Court, Amarantha's whore, and to set himself up to be an inside maneuver for whenever the opportunity would present itself.
Then came time for the masquerade. This masquerade was thrown by Amarantha. This is after all of their High Lord's powers have been captured by her, to make amends with Lucien, who, as Tamlin's emissary, went to Amarantha to treaty for peace. And when Amarantha refused peace, Lucien told her to return to the shithole of Hybern that she came from. And so she gouged out his eye with her fingernail. So Amarantha throws this big old masquerade to be like, oh, I'm so sorry about that. Silly me. It was a masquerade so that Lucien did not have to reveal the scarring on his face, and the entire spring court was to attend, even the servants, all wearing masks to represent Tamlin's shape-shifting powers. And for stupid Tamlin reasons, he agreed to go because he wanted to end this conflict without more slaughter. Very on brand for Tamlin. And once everyone was there, she said, you know what, Tamlin, it's time to become my lover. And he, of course, said no. So in a good mood, Amarantha cursed Tamlin. Quote, and this is from Rhys in chapter 54. And my other great enemy became the one loophole that might free us all. Think back to his anger at Tamlin in ACOTAR. Yes, it was because of their history and their family feud and whatever, but also it is absolutely influenced by the fact that Rhys was giving everything over to this vile woman every single night. And he knew that Tamlin, the only loophole, at the time wasn't doing jack shit to get everyone out from under the mountain.
Now, for plenty of reasons, we can't fault Tamlin for refusing to be Amarantha's consort. That's not what we're saying here. But this illustrates how different these two High Lords are and how they face presented challenges.
And we do have to give Tamlin his credit here, which is not something I thought I would say in chapter 54. He tried at first to break the curse placed upon him in the Spring Court. But when the death of too many centuries weighed far too heavily on him, he gave up and stopped altogether. That's what we don't like about you, Tamlin. So instead, only a few months before the 7x7 years, aka the 49-year deadline, Tamlin decided to pick back up at square one and started sending sentries out, including Andrus.
And as we all know, Feyre killed Andrus the fairy with hate in her heart. By this time, in a few pages, we'll learn Rhys had been having visions of this human girl, his future mate, for several years now. Fate brought her into these circumstances to save Prythian, to eventually be united with her mate. I just want to point out, Tamlin never succeeded before this because everyone, Prythian and Rhys, were waiting until Feyre showed up. And soon after she showed up in Rhys's visions, circumstances brought her back into this world.
And I do want to point out that when Feyre was in the Spring Court, Tamlin's efforts ranged from minimal to half-assed, and then to caring for her safety more than the entirety of his cursed court. It's fine. But here was Rhys all along, every night for 50 years inside of Amarantha and thinking about killing her. Quote, she had no idea, none, because I was so good at my job that she thought I enjoyed it too. This absolutely breaks my heart for what he was doing and giving and sacrificing every single night versus Tamlin, who we have talked endlessly on the podcast, that ranging from minimal to half-assed to interesting priorities. So Amarantha began to trust Rhys more than the others under the mountain. She would ask him to kill or do even worse things to her enemies. Quote, I was glad to do it. I hated myself, but I was glad to do it. I've always wondered on reading this chapter why that is. Why was he so happy to do it? My assumption is it's because he at least felt like he was doing fucking something, or because he was so angry at what his life had become that taking it out on someone, anyone, even if it was his enemy's enemy, it felt at least good to get that anger out.
I understood it as he felt like he deserved this punishment, that this reflected his worth so that it was this vicious cycle. He hated himself for what he had to become, don a permanent mask to protect what and who he loved. As a result, he felt he deserved this self-hatred, and that was his punishment. So because he deserved this punishment, he was happy to serve it to himself. But I do agree with you about how this made him feel something. Rhys had no happiness, nothing to hope for himself anymore, so he was happy to become lost in this mask.
After a decade, Rhys stops expecting to see his friends, his family, his city ever again. Quote, I forgot what their faces looked like, and I stopped hoping. Oh,
my heart breaks every time I read that. It also calls back to Feyre's comment to her father when he told her the importance of hope. Remember when she said, quote, there's no such thing. It ties back to how these two hopeless souls found hope again within themselves and with each other. It is fascinating to get this backstory of Rhys's POV with Amarantha, setting us up for his circumstances when he enters our story. He has teary eyes as he continues, speaking quietly because now is when Feyre enters the fold. Not when they met at Calamai like you would probably think, but 3 years ago.
I love that the moment Feyre enters the story, that is when he starts crying.
3 years ago. Remember reading that for the first time? 3 years ago, I began to have these dreams. Immediately, as the story focus shifts to Feyre, we open with a record-scratching moment that this goes so much deeper than we initially thought. Rhys had lost all hope by this point, and the only happiness he found was in his self-loathing. But these dreams, these visions started coming to him. This would have been when Feyre was 17 years old, which I assume he began having them when she was, I'll call it maturing. Rhys would see a crackling hearth in a dark home, as we know, the fire in the Archeron's cottage, a bale of hay in a barn, because yes, friends, this means that Rhys got glimpses into
I cannot believe
an average sex lover extraordinaire's tumbles in the barn. Obviously, he did not know what this meant, but you can't help but giggle knowing what Feyre indeed did in that barn. He also would see a warren of rabbits, Feyre hunting for her family. These images were foggy, which he'll soon share is the wall and how the magic of it creates a fog over their connection. He is looking through Feyre's eyes with these visions, but he thought nothing of them until, quote, one of the images was a hand, this beautiful human hand, holding a brush, painting flowers on a table. We've talked so much about the symbolism of painting for Feyre, but now we have insight into the significance of her painting for Rhys. Remember the Prythian text where he was asking her about the painting? And when she painted for the first time again on his hand at Starfall? And of course now in the cabin, he walks in and is captivated by all the painting she has done. Because yes, he knows how important it is to her and her identity, and her love and joy for painting holds such a special place in his own heart because her painting was the first true impression of this human girl who would later become his mate. Her joy for painting gave him comfort for years, even before she fully embraced that creative and passionate side of herself. Quote, and that time I pushed a thought back of the night sky, of the image that brought me joy when I needed it most. Open night sky, stars and the moon. I didn't know if it was received, but I tried anyway. Who's got chills right now? I'm pretty sure Nicole's crying over there. It was only last episode when Feyre shared with Rhys what she painted for her sisters on their dresser drawers.
He asked, quote, what did you paint for yourself? And she replied, the night sky. And then Rhys stilled. This is why he stilled. This is why the impact of her telling him that she painted the night sky was unbelievably monumental for him. He had pushed that thought into her mind years ago, and he never knew until that very moment last episode if that image had also been received.
And while he was trapped under Amarantha's thumb, with no hope and only long ago memories as his source of joy, these visions, and specifically his thought of the night sky reaching through this connection, became a lifeline for him. Quote, those dreams, the flashes of that person, that woman, I treasured them. They were a reminder that there was some peace out there in the world, some light. He goes on to say that it was comforting to know that there was a place out there in the world away from this hellhole where someone had enough safety to paint flowers on the table. We know from her perspective that she didn't consider her life to be safe. Maybe that summer, yes, when they had enough money for extras like paint and the ash arrows she purchased. But overall, Feyre was a survivalist who worked hard and always stressed about keeping her family alive. Not discounting that whatsoever. However, when you look at these glimpses from Rhys's perspective, he held on to this spark of comfort that there was a bigger and better world beyond the torment he and the rest of the courts endured every single day. He still holds a lot of anger at her sisters for their complacency all those years in poverty, and I have to wonder if a contributing factor to that is he thought this human girl was in a better state of life than she actually was. and her sisters are partly to blame.
Remember back in ACOTAR when Fae-vorite and her father was sitting at the dining room table. Papa Archeron said, quote, "We need hope, or else we cannot endure. Let her imagine a better life, a better world." Hope for a better world is what the foundation of the Court of Dreams is. When Fae-vorite was so against the idea of hope, Rhys was seeing through her eyes, and she was the hope he needed for peace out in the world when he believed he would never see it again.
And then a year ago, he jolted awake from a dream that was clearer and brighter, like the fog had been wiped away. Yes, because Fae-vorite was now in Prythian, and the magical cloud of the wall no longer separated them. We experienced Rhys here on the page back in ACOTAR chapter 11, when Fae-vorite had the bad dream soon after the Puka and Bogey encounters within her first week or so in the Spring Court. In her dream, quote, "Behind me, a shadow lurked. No, watched. I didn't dare turn to look at it, to see who might be within that shadow observing." And friends, Sarah J. Maas has actually confirmed that Rhys was indeed the shadow watching over her. Now, this is not actually the same dream that Rhys describes here in chapter 54. The dream he is referring to is when a woman slit Fae-vorite's throat, which she did dream about in chapter 17 after her run-in with the Naga, when no shadow was mentioned. And then she dreamed again about this woman in chapter 19. But aha, this is the time we have the shadow mention. And sorry, friends, I just have to quote this whole thing here from chapter 19 in ACOTAR. "And though my dreams continued to be plagued by the death I'd witnessed, the death I'd caused, and that horrible pale woman ripping me to shreds, all watched over by a shadow I could never quite glimpse, I slowly stopped being so afraid. Stay with the High Lord, you will be safe." And so I did. In the same sentence as mentioning a shadow watching over her, Fae-vorite felt she was no longer afraid. And in the next sentence, the Suriel's words echo in her mind, "Stay with the High Lord, you will be safe." Double meaning or not, we know that the Suriel was talking about Rhys. And unknowingly, she is staying with the High Lord and finding comfort in this mysterious shadow, and she is slowly no longer afraid. SJM, I love it. Rhys still didn't know who this human woman was or anything about her or why in the world she was in Prythian. And this is a little bit of a side note, but I love this little nugget about how, quote, "the creatures belong to all courts" from her nightmares. Most of these monstrous creatures flocked to Amarantha from all the courts because she gave them the freedom to be evil. And then under her reign, she sent them into the Spring Court to mess with Tamlin.
You know what we would need in order to be up against all these monstrous creatures? And by up against, I mean run away from them. Hydration. But Lexi, healthy hydration is not just about drinking water. It's about water and electrolytes, except most of us only worry about the water when we're trying to stay hydrated.
The solution obviously isn't to stop drinking water, though. It's to drink water plus electrolytes. Enter Element. Element is an electrolyte solution that has enough sodium, potassium, and magnesium to get you feeling and performing your best. Plus, my favorite part is that it has zero sugar, artificial flavors, or other dodgy ingredients to hold you back.
My favorite part of Element is the variety of flavors. I love flavor. That is like a part of me. It is a part of my life. My husband literally calls me the flavor queen. So being able to go to my variety pack and just have all of these different flavors to choose from is so fun. I've been really gravitating towards the citrus salt recently. And I actually want to shout out to basically our brother, Michael, who has recently also been trying Element. He is obsessed with Element.
My favorite's the watermelon salt for sure.
Really good.
It's so perfect for summertime.
Mango chili is just forever in my heart. Like I just love mango. Like I'm on my little citrus salt kick now, but I'm going to always go back to mango chili. I love it.
Element came up with a fantastic offer for us. Just go to drinklmnt.com/FFG to get a free sample pack with any purchase. Thanks, Element.
One night, those dreams of Rhys's turned into green hills and the unlit bonfires of Calamai. Knowing that there was only one celebration like it in all of Prythian, he knew there was a high possibility that he would see this human woman there. So he told Amarantha that he wanted to go to the Spring Court celebration, telling her that he wanted to spy on Tamlin, specifically if anyone would show up to conspire with him. Which, yeah, between like killing the white stag and starting a country hillside-wide orgy, it's a great time to talk battle plans, in my opinion.
Okay, I understand your point. Tamlin himself would have been busy, but it actually reminds me of Game of Thrones, and in our real history, if I remember correctly, George R.R. Martin took this from actual instances where historically tournaments were a great cover-up for all the big important players to gather together, and it was how they were able to communicate and make their treacherous plans together without it being suspicious. So I could definitely see Amarantha being a little bit on high alert when these holidays come around and everybody has a reason to gather together.
I love that you're like in Game of Thrones, and I think in real life too. Like, tell me you're a fantasy fangirl without telling me you're a fantasy fangirl. I love that. So paranoid, Amarantha was like, go, 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 and bring back traitors, please. Which, pause. There were obviously many reasons why Tamlin and Lucien did not want Feyre to go to Calamai, mainly because of the big wide orgy, and Tamlin knew he would pick her, and he didn't want their first time to be while he's under magic mushrooms, basically. I also wonder if this is a reason why, because anyone can come into their territory this night, and they were getting closer and closer to the deadline. So seeing a mortal woman in the spring court would raise some flags to people, and people would be like, is Tamlin getting closer? So I think that's also a huge reason why they didn't want her to go, which if they were thinking this, I do not blame them for being so insistent on Feyre staying in her room. However, I do think it was more to protect Feyre from Tamlin in his magic sex mode. I don't think they thought that far ahead. I'm gonna be honest. From chapter 54, Rhys meets Feyre's eyes and continues, quote, I got there and I could smell you, so I tracked that scent. In seeing her in his dreams, he was waking up with the scent of her on his nose. So never having actually met her, he already knew what she smelled like, making it easier to find her in the crowd. And where was she? She was being dragged away by 3 fuckwads. And quote, I just moved. Continuing, I started speaking without knowing what I was saying, only that you were there and I was touching you. From ACOTAR chapter 20, quote, they were strong hands, warm and broad, and a deep, sensual male voice said, there you are. I've been looking for you. Those first words to her, they were not a lie at all, as Feyre realizes here in chapter 54. They were a threat to the 3 fairies, yes, or maybe a Ryan Gosling moment that Lexi shared, trying to get her out of a bad situation at the bar. It's fine. But no, these words that Rhys had said to her were 100% truth. Like I mentioned at the top of this chapter, one of the reasons we love this story is for how much different it is on a reread, and Calamai is no exception. No one on their first read would know the significance of these 8 words, but now they've become a full rallying cry for us as a fandom in this beautiful love story. These 8 words are so universally known as the, I see someone in trouble, let me help get them out of it. But in this story, in ACOTAR, to us fans, these 8 words mean something different entirely. It is a 3-year-long longing.
And it represents a spark of hope, holding on to the simple comfort that this person in the world exists.
That is what gives us chills every time we read this story. But as Lexi mentioned earlier, last episode when Feyre was telling him about the dresser and how she painted the night sky, she says, quote, I wonder if, even in my despair and hopelessness, I was never truly alone. I wonder if I was looking for this place, looking for you all. And Rhys says, quote, I was looking for you too. A direct callback to this moment of there you are, I've been looking for you on Calamai.
Imagine Rhys's, I'll even call it confusion, at this unknown connection with a human. We know that he is not prejudiced against humans, but we've also established that there is an undeniable power imbalance. The most powerful High Lord in history, dreaming and smelling a human? Quote, and there you were, human, utterly human, and being dragged away. Plus, in chapter 55, he'll say that he thought from the moment they first met at Calamai that she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He won't gain clarity that they're mates until Amarantha is killing Feyre under the mountain. But even now in his subconscious, he knows. And what are mates? They're equals. He doesn't understand why this connection between them exists, but in hindsight, we can recognize that she is destined for great things.
Well, and even later in this chapter, he says, I thought that you were being brought into my mind, into my visions, that you were going to be like our salvation. Almost like he was seeing like a prophecy come true. So I think that if anything, he was seeing this human girl and he was like, oh, like, you're going to be very important for all of our salvation. In this moment on Calamai, his hands are described as warm and strong, and he slipped a casual arm around her. But the irony is that in this moment on Calamai, when he says, there you are, I've been looking for you, she's not even looking at Rhys because she's keeping her eyes fixed on the danger ahead of these 3 fuckwad fairies, which is exactly how she acted in her dreams when he was the shadow lurking behind her. She didn't turn around and look at the shadow. She was only focusing on the Naga, the bogey, the faceless woman who was slicing her throat open. Fair. Like, if someone was slicing my throat open, I would probably not be like, what's the shadow behind me, So it's just interesting that that's coming to light here at Calamai as well. Feyre, hearing this part of Rhys's story, feels very much a sense of the world slipping out from under her feet. Like many of us readers when we understand the full meaning behind this special moment on Calamai. Rhys goes back to his High Lord's tale because she looked at him after all the fuckwads left and quote, I knew you had no idea who I was, that I might have seen your dreams, but you hadn't seen mine. So he assumed that she had no interest in him. And yes, she was intimidated by him, or he'll later say nervous. Nervous is a better word for it. And yes, she lied to his face about why she was there, with friends, quote unquote, on Calamai. And yes, she knew he was dangerous, but uninterested is far from how she felt. She was not able to walk away or even shut her mouth. Love Feyre. Quote from ACOTAR. I had never seen anyone so handsome. I never had so many warning bells peeled off in my head because of it. We speculated during our coverage of Calamai that these were not warning bells at all, but she has been led to fear these fairies and, this particularly scary one. So she thinks that those are warning bells, but instead they might have been mate bells going off in her head. Knowing that if he stayed much longer, someone would see them together, report back to Amarantha, and Amarantha would find Feyre and do unspeakable things to her. So in ACOTAR on Calamai, Rhys attempts to walk away, telling her to enjoy the rite and stay out of trouble. And Feyre thought, quote, his eyes gleamed in a way that suggested staying out of trouble meant staying far away from him.
But then, as he says in chapter 54, you couldn't let go of me just yet, whether you knew it or not. Remember that at that time at Calamai, when she couldn't let go of him, Feyre blurted out, so you're not a part of the spring court? And that led down to the rest of their conversation.
Rhys, knowing how dangerous this was, them continuing to talk, knowing that he could never speak to her again because of that reason, he decided he did not even want to know why she was here. He did not even want to know her name. Quote, because seeing you in my dreams had been one thing, but in person, right then, deep down, I think I knew what you were, and I didn't let myself admit it because if there was the slightest chance that you were my mate, they would have done such unspeakable things to you, Feyre. Rhys believed even then that anything good in his life would be taken away. Feyre knew that she should leave, knew that she should stop talking to him and shut her mouth. But she asks him why he was there at that celebration. Quote from ACOTAR. The man's remarkable eyes seemed to glow with enough of a deadly edge that I backed up a step. He said, quote, because all of the monsters have been let out of their cages tonight, no matter what court they belong to. So I may roam wherever I wish until the dawn. And that is when Feyre finally decides to step away and reintegrate herself with the celebration. And only after she was gone did he tell himself that quote, maybe the Cauldron had been kind and not cruel for letting me see you. Just once, a gift for what I was enduring.
What a glimmer of light after decades of self-loathing or being surrounded by and exhibiting so much cruelty. Again, there's that spark of hope and joy to tuck away for him because yes, he deserved that gift for all that he was enduring. Rhys, baby, you deserve all the good things.
Rhysand found those three fairies who were about to take Feyre into the woods and douche canoes is not even the right word. Just unspeakable words, explicitives attached to these fuckwads.
Tell me what your
I hate them. They're terrible.
Spitting into a microphone.
So Rhys broke into their minds, reshaped their whole lives, which, by the way, his powers are diminished. So this is a big deal. And brought them before Amarantha. Remember those traitors she wanted? Here you go, Amarantha, on a silver platter. He made them confess to gathering rebel forces that night, and she carved them up while they were still alive. And Rhys enjoyed watching it because he knew what they were going to do to Feyre in the woods. And quote, it would have paled in comparison to what Amarantha would have done if she'd found you. Feyre recalls the words Rhys said to her in Rhys's room under the mountain. She asked him why Amarantha had let him out on Fire Night. And he said, quote, I had my reasons to be out then. Do not think, Feyre, that it did not cost me. It did cost him. Emotionally, it cost him to walk away from her knowing deep down what she was to him. Rhys continues, and he confesses that he did not know that Tamlin was with her, or she was with Tamlin, or even didn't know that she was staying in the spring court. So the day in the dining room. Here we go, friends. We're back in the dining room. After summer solstice, Amarantha sent him again due to his success on Fire Night. And Rhys wasn't prepared to just be an ass. He was going to pick a fight. He was going to maybe mock Tamlin for being an idiot. And going back to the scene in ACOTAR, everything up until Rhys discovering Fae-vorite in the dining room is him playing with Tamlin's emotion. He's being the High Lord of the Night Court like nobody's business. And he specifically mocks Tamlin for his actions or lack thereof in the Spring Court. He says to him, quote, "I'm surprised though, 49 years and no attempts to save yourself or your lands." What a slap in the face. I love him. This is a huge reason why Rhys is infuriated with this blonde High Lord. Tamlin appeared, in italics, appeared to not have fought at all, or at least attempted to save his lands and thus save everyone under the mountain. And take a moment and put Rhys in Tamlin's shoes. He would have been doing his Ravenclaw scheming, plotting. He would have had at least 16 different plans to save the lands. He would have fought until his last freaking breath, because that is what he is doing right now under the mountain. But here is Tamlin again appearing to have all the luxuries and freedoms in the world that any other court would kill for, and not doing a damn thing about it to help everyone else. So yeah, Rhys is going to be an asshole to him. I kind of get it. But then a familiar scent hits him, but it's hidden, and he sees a third place setting at the table. Remember, in this moment, Fae-vorite, Tamlin, and Lucien were having their lunch/breakfast after partying all night long at the summer solstice. And sensing his presence in the house, Tamlin ordered Lucien to glamour Fae-vorite and mask her scent. But they forgot to mask that place setting at the table. So just as Rhys was about to leave, he noticed the place setting and lifted the goblet up to sniff it, confirming her scent in the goblet that she was drinking. Quote from ACOTAR, "Rhysand now faced the High Lord, and his perfect face was void of emotion before his brows rose. A flicker of excitement, perhaps even disbelief, flashed across his features. Disbelief that she was living with Tamlin, his second most enemy. Disbelief that he was going to be seeing her again after thinking he was never going to. And excitement that he was going to be seeing her again. But also back to disbelief that she was looking at Tamlin like she loved him."
Plus, her and Tamlin's scents were tangled up in each other after their romantic night dancing and kissing with the will-o'-the-wisps from the night before.
From ACOTAR dining room scene, quote, "I stared at Rhysand in undiluted terror as his face contorted with rage." Rage, yes. We now learn that rage was because she was living in Tamlin's house. But it is also rage that she was the woman he is trying to break the curse with, which means Tamlin was having her fall in love with him. So there's that jealousy. But then there's also the danger that Tamlin is putting her in as a result. And here is his sign of, oh shit, Tamlin is actually doing something to break this curse. And Fae-vorite was looking at Tamlin like she loved him, meaning that he was succeeding in breaking the curse. But it was with the one person that Rhys wished against all odds that it wasn't. So he decided it was time to scare the shit out of him, and it worked. From ACOTAR, quote, "Against my volition, my body straightened, every single muscle going taut, my bones straining. Magic, but deeper than that. Power that seized everything inside me and took control. Even my blood flowed where he willed it." And yes, this terrifies her like it would any normal person, especially when he started reading into her thoughts and explaining them out loud about what she's feeling about Tamlin. And all the while, it was a new kind of magic. Unlike anything she's ever seen, it terrified Fae-vorite, but it especially terrified and spooked Tamlin. Rhys didn't stop at just taking control of her mind, though. Quote from ACOTAR, "Amarantha will enjoy breaking her, almost as much as she'll enjoy watching you as she shatters her bit by bit." This is the moment Tamlin stops yelling enough at Rhys and instead switches to frozen terror and begins begging, please. Rhys made Tamlin beg, just like Amarantha for 49 years made Rhysand beg. Amarantha did this just to show Rhys how terribly powerless he was in comparison to her.
And here, in turn, Rhys is doing this to Tamlin to show how powerless Tamlin is up against Rhys and Amarantha.
And just as he had hoped for, his performance was successful enough to get Tamlin to send Fae-vorite back to the mortal realm, saving her from Amarantha's wrath.
Like we've said before on the podcast, and even in this episode, we have given Tamlin an endless hard time about sending Fae-vorite back to the mortal realm when they were so close to breaking the curse, and how he condemned his court to Under the Mountain too. But Rhys thought this too. Rhys was set on keeping keeping her safe above anything else, so he helped orchestrate Tamlin to do this. So it might seem like there is a double standard here about why we're not so mad at Rhys for doing this to protect Feyre when we are with Tamlin wanting to protect her. I'll also say Rhys understandably didn't care about the Spring Court like Tamlin should have. Rhys cared more for this human than for Tamlin's court, and he had already given up on any hope of escaping Amarantha's power for himself.
But as we learn in chapter 54, Rhys wanted to at least know her name. And he says, I selfishly wanted to know your name. He knew, or at least highly assumed, that this would be the last time he would ever see her. So knowing her name wouldn't matter anyway. He wanted to know just this one thing about the woman he's been seeing in his dreams. But she lies. And he knew that she was lying as well.
In this chapter 54, he says, quote, I had your mind in my hands, and you had the defiance and foresight to lie to my face. Yes, Feyre was a fragile human, but she proved that she had the spirit to stand up to him. She wouldn't cower to this high lord with her mind in his hands, and he respected her and was a little bit in awe that she did that. I just love that tiny little nod that she is indeed his equal, even when she was just utterly human.
From the dining room scene, quote, keeping my mind blank and calm, I blurted the first name that came to mind. I love this little addition of keeping her mind blank because Rhys, like Lexi said, has her mind in his hands. But since her mind was blank, he didn't hear why she said this name via his Damati powers. And I'm assuming he didn't delve any deeper.
Yeah, I didn't think he thought that there was a reason to. He assumed that she used a made-up name, and that was that.
Which he will learn to sad, dire consequences. And then Rhys leaves the Spring Court, vomiting his guts up as a result of walking away from her yet again.
He was literally sick with himself over how he had to treat her and scare her, how he had to show her the monster he made himself become to keep those he loved safe. Rhys even checked back once to make sure Feyre was gone before he went with Amarantha's forces to ransack the manor, making his performance complete. Not knowing that Feyre gave him a real person's name instead of her own and thinking it was invented, he gave the name to Amarantha. I admit I've always wondered why he told Amarantha anyone's name, since she was not aware that Tamlin was about to break the curse with a human girl, and if Rhys hadn't said anything about there being a girl, then there would be no need to release a name in the first place. So as I think about it, I'm going to assume her forces would have figured out that there had been a human girl at the manor when they arrived at the curse's deadline. They'd be able to smell her, find traces of a human girl staying on site, or maybe Rhys was scared someone in the Spring Court would rat Tamlin out after they were taken under the mountain. They would have some good reason to, since he just totally threw them to the wolves. And if Amarantha or any of her crew found out that there had been a human girl and Rhys hadn't reported it, that would put him in hot water. So he assumed it was innocent enough to give a fake name that would lead to a dead end because, hey, the girl would have left the dangers of the Spring Court by the time they raided it. That's my head canon there because I needed that to make sense in my head. Like I said, he figured this name would lead to a dead end. But unfortunately for poor Claire Better, Amarantha sent her cronies over the wall to retrieve Claire, burning her family's home and all the rest of her family inside in the process. Rhys had no idea Amarantha did that, and he was stuck in a bad situation. He could admit his lie that this girl with the name he provided was not the same girl he saw at Tamlin's, and therefore send Amarantha on the hunt to find the real Feyre, or he could stay quiet and have to live with the guilt of Claire's death. Rhys did his best with the shitty hand dealt, mostly to Claire, the poor
Never
hand
forget
that she was
you,
dealt
Claire.
here. He broke into her mind when they brought her under the mountain and took her pain away. She was tortured but didn't feel any of the pain, and the screams were fake. As Rhys is sharing this with Feyre, he is stumbling over his words, so hesitant as he tells this part of the story with such lingering guilt. Quote, I tried to make it right, but after a week, I couldn't let them do it. Rhys slipped into Claire's mind and gave her a swift, painless death, so her body would no longer be tortured. Claire is one more person who he still sees, quote, and my men, and the others that I killed for Amarantha. Rhys was used as a weapon for decades, and he was made to do terrible things, and he will never forget it or really forgive himself for the things that he did, including to this poor innocent human girl, Claire.
Plus, while he was under the mountain, literally no one was able to forget about Claire because, might I remind you, I will never get over this. She was hung up in the throne room for 3+ months, absolutely reeking terribly. All these high Fae have this high, keen sense of smell. Never forget you, Claire, you poor thing.
As Rhys shares the story, 2 tears slide down his cheeks and he doesn't wipe them away. He's not trying to hide his sadness and raw emotion. He's not trying to push past it. Because Feyre, his mate, can see all of him, all the emotion, all the guilt, all the pain that he carries and is just laying out here on the table. With Claire's death, Rhys thought that this was all done. Amarantha thought the girl who was Tamlin's lover was killed, and the real human girl would get to continue living safely, freely, thanks to Rhys's performance in scaring Tamlin and her. To put it simply, Tamlin had lost, and they were all resigned to living under Amarantha's reign, no hope of beating her and regaining their power. As we've mentioned, Rhys is a chess player, but after so many decades, after getting run down the way he did and losing the one good glimmer in his life, he was resigned in a way we rarely see from him. The one loophole all the courts relied on over those decades failed and ended, leaving them all in despair, including Rhys. But then, what's this? Rhys continues the story we are all familiar with from Feyre's POV. I love getting to see the full ACOTAR story, specifically Under the Mountain, from his point of view. Quote, but then I was in the back of the throne room that day the Adder brought you in, and I have never known such horror, Feyre, as I did when I watched you make that bargain. Irrational, stupid terror. I didn't know you. I didn't even know your name. But I thought of those painters' hands, the flowers I'd seen you create, and how she'd delight in breaking your fingers apart. By the way, do you all realize how difficult it is for us not to just read this entire chapter to you? I know we are practically doing it, but you know. Rhys's subconscious inkling that they are mates cannot bear the thought of Feyre being tortured and broken by Amarantha. His worst fear was playing out in real time. Despite his efforts, she showed up under the mountain anyway. And again, his number one goal was to protect her. And here she was walking straight into the lion's den that he had desperately tried to stop her from entering. But all the while, he had to keep his mask on, had to keep pretending to be the monster, because if he let it slip even a fraction and show how distraught he truly was at seeing the Adder and its cronies beat her, far worse things would have happened to her. Quote, and then I learned your name. Hearing you say it, it was like an answer to a question I'd been asking for 500 years. My heart. Mates are incredibly rare in this world, and for Rhys to find his mate, even if he doesn't consciously realize it yet, it is such a gift. The name of his mate is the answer to a question he didn't even realize he's been asking for his entire existence. She is the happiness, the fulfillment, the wholeness that he has been subconsciously waiting for and looking for centuries. Looking at the scene from Feyre's perspective, remember how Amarantha had called Rhys forward from the back of the throne room to help persuade her into giving her real name. When Amarantha asked if this was the same girl he saw at Tamlin's estate, he lied to her face, saying all humans looked alike to him, and Feyre knew it as a lie at the time. He was playing into Amarantha's prejudice against humans to not blow his cover, and Feyre thought, quote, humans all look alike. I didn't believe him for a second. Rhysand knew exactly how I looked. He'd recognized me that day at the manor. As he held Lucian's mind, Feyre blurted out her name to save Lucian. And I love it because at the time, there was no hint of this reaction we hear from Rhys in chapter 54. At the time, quote, he hadn't even removed his hands from his pockets.
Question. I wonder if he hadn't removed his hands from his pockets because his hands were shaking. Because we know that there are multiple moments where his hands shake and he puts them in his pockets.
Bet you're right. Oh my goodness, I love that so much. But as we learn from Rhys now, he tells Feyre and us, quote, I decided then and there that I was going to fight, and I would fight dirty and kill and torture and manipulate, but I was going to fight. If there was a shot at freeing us from Amarantha, you were it. As we've mentioned many times already, Rhys had lost hope of being free from Amarantha or of ever seeing his friends and beloved city again. But Feyre's presence here and her bargain with Amarantha, as terrified as Rhys was for her safety that she entered it, he also saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be freed. And like he says, he planned to play dirty. He was not going to play by any rules because that's the only way you truly have a chance at getting out of these impossible situations. After her first trial and her fatal injury, there you go, buddy. There's your in. Quote, a way to defy Amarantha, to spread the seeds of hope to those who knew how to read the message, and a way to keep you alive without seeming too suspicious. This is quite the loaded sentence, especially in terms of, quote, spread the seeds of hope to those who knew how to read the message. Rhys was putting on a mask, a performance while under the mountain, but clearly there were those who could read between the lines, or at least he hoped they were. We don't get a lot of insight into this moving forward in our story, but I'm wondering if other High Lords like Helion understood that he truly was trying to keep this human woman alive so she would have a chance at beating Amarantha and saving them all. Tarquin certainly got this gist, though he used a more relevant experience to the Summer Court to identify that Rhys was not as terrible as he was made out to be, and he had a bigger plan. Once again, Rhys was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. In fact, I texted that to Nicole when I was reading ACOTAR for the very first time. I had no idea what was going to happen down the line. So I was like, oh, this guy's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
I was giddy when I saw that.
I was so happy I was right. But besides the other courts who knew how to interpret the true message he was giving, Rhys needed his in with Feyre. He had to play a very dangerous balancing act of being there for her and keeping her safe and supporting her, but not make it seem like he was doing it for her. Rhys had to keep his monster mask on so not to raise suspicions that he cared for Feyre. He had to focus on the act of keeping her safe, and everything around ensuring that played into his role as Amarantha's lapdog and evil High Lord of the Night Court. He had to make her hate him as part of his performance. He dressed her up in scandalous dresses so Amarantha wouldn't suspect he cared in the slightest for her. Plus, of course, he was trying to piss Tamlin off and rile him up, so when the time did come to unleash his power, he would direct it first at Amarantha and give the killing blow. We talked so much about that during our ACOTAR coverage. He made her drink the wine every night so Feyre would not remember the nightly horrors in that mountain and be plagued by those kind of nightmares. The night before her third trial, we all remember Tamlin meeting her in the hall, and they shared a very passionate kiss. Well, now let's hear Rhys's POV of that scene. Quote, I was jealous of him and pissed off that he'd used that one shot of being unnoticed not to get you out, but to be with you. And Amarantha saw that jealousy. She saw me kissing you to hide the evidence, but she saw why.
From Rhys under the mountain, quote, what do I care? He breathed, wrath twisting his features. Those membranous, glorious wings flared from his back, crafting from shadows behind him. What do I care? This is so meaningful now with the Chapter 54 background. This what do I care is so loaded, as we discussed back in our ACOTAR coverage. But the fact that he cares for her and he's jealous is actually one of those reasons of what do I care? The other reason is he's like, I've been working overtime for 3 months and you and Tamlin with thinking with your dicks are about to throw it all away. But I also love this wing watch from the past, we'll call it. Rhys is alone with Feyre and losing his temper, yes, but his wings are coming out in her presence. They are immediately vanished, though, when Amarantha's footsteps approach.
And like you were saying, over the past weeks that Rhys has made her dress up and dance for him, be the evening's entertainment, Amarantha didn't think of Feyre as competition by any means. However, when Amarantha walked in on Feyre and Rhys kissing, she noticed that jealousy of what Tamlin and her had shared, and she was pissed at Rhys for having such feelings.
From Under the Mountain, Chapter 42, quote, something sparked in the queen's eyes as she looked at Rhysand. We know what that spark was. It was, fuck you, bitch, trying to steal my boy.
Both boys.
Both boys.
So unfortunately, she made him service her for longer than usual that night. But Amarantha was not the only jealous one. Rhys was jealous of Tamlin and angry that he wasted his one chance to get Feyre out to instead put his hands on her. once again showing just how different these two High Lords are. Tamlin is pretty short-sighted, playing checkers, while Rhys plays the long game, chess. Back at Starfall, Rhys has already admitted how he wishes he could take that kiss back from under the mountain. It wasn't real, it wasn't motivated by love, but rather desperation, jealousy, and strategy to keep Thera safe. And here he is again, saying how he was jealous of Tamlin and pissed off that Tamlin didn't take advantage of an opportunity like he would have to protect the woman he loved. That night, while Amarantha made Rhys service her, she tried to squeeze answers out of him. We can gather that she was asking questions about Thera and how Rhys felt about her and all of that, to which Rhys, quote, gave her what she wanted to hear, that you, Thera, was nothing, that you were human garbage, that I'd use and discard you. This is playing, again, right into what Amarantha would want to hear about a human. Remember that disdain she has for them, especially following Jurian and what he did to her sister. And after that whole encounter with Amarantha that evening, we know from ACOTAR, he went to Thera's cell. Quote, I wanted to see you one last time, alone. I thought about telling you everything, but who I'd become, who you thought I was, I didn't dare shatter that deception. Let's go back to Thera's POV in the cell under the mountain. When Rhys first stepped inside, she barked, what do you want? And he said, a moment of peace and quiet, to which he continued with quite vulnerable comments about how that damned bitch running me ragged, and that he was tired and lonely, and, quote, one wrong move tomorrow, Thera, and we're all doomed.
This was the scene that, up until the moment on the balcony, this was the most candid moment we had with Rhys in all of ACOTAR. He might not have told her everything as he says he thought about doing in chapter 54, but to be honest, even if he had told her everything in this moment in the cell under the mountain, I don't think she would have believed him. But he did tell her at least why he's having her drink the wine every night, why he's having her dance and wear barely anything dresses. It was all to make Tamlin so angry that he kills Amarantha the second the curse is lifted. But most importantly, he told her about the bigger things at stake for him, his territory, all the lives of the Night Court citizens, and how Amarantha can end them all with a single word. He's not talking about the Inner Circle directly, but he is definitely implying them here.
Here in chapter 54, like I said, Rhys admits that he almost told her everything. So we can assume that everything means the visions, Calamite, and his mask, not the mating bond, because he says in a little bit that he didn't know that it was truly there until Amarantha was killing Thera after the third task. But he couldn't bring himself to shatter this deception. Rhys was also scared that if he took off his mask, Thera would not accept him. And he was not emotionally ready for the possibility of revealing his true self and risking her still wanting nothing to do with him. Calling back to her hurtful words to him here in ACOMAF, making him flinch when she said, quote, what if they saw everything and still walked away? Who could blame them? Who would want to bother with that sort of mess? Right here, he was about to tell her essentially the mess. He knew, probably rightly, that she would not have taken it very well. After Thera's final trial, where she ripped her soul apart for Tamlin and Amarantha started torturing her, from chapter 54, quote, something snapped in a way I couldn't explain. Only that seeing you bleeding and screaming undid me. It broke me at last, and I knew as I picked up that knife to kill her, I knew right then what you were. I knew that you were my mate, and you were in love with another male, and had destroyed yourself to save him, and that I didn't care. If you were going to die, I was going to die with you. I mean, yeah, I honestly don't know what to even add to this beautiful dialogue. Again, going back to that telling, not showing, and really giving it the limelight. When she was being killed, it became very clear to Rhys that she was his mate. Perhaps it was specifically in that moment because we know how territorial and protective mates are with each other. So when Amarantha was literally killing Thera, he realized that yes, she is his mate. Did he suspect it subconsciously beforehand? Yes, absolutely. But this is true realization and full awareness. You are my mate, my mate, my mate, he thought over and over again as Thera screamed. Rhys tried to kill Amarantha when he was still sucked of his powers, but he tried to stop her from killing the woman he loved. Guess who didn't? Who only begged her to stop instead of actively doing something about it? Tamlin. And Thera never forgave him for it, because Rhys also didn't have his powers, which was Tamlin's excuse. But hey, he at least tried. He had fallen in love with her, and he fought for her because she had fought for Prythian and sacrificed her soul and self in the process. And he saw that and cared and needed to do something. He connected so deeply with that sacrifice, and he knew that she was the one for him. I'm sorry, I know I'm quoting so much, but I need to quote this whole part from chapter 54 because it is so heart-wrenching and beautiful. Quote, "But then she snapped your neck." Tears rolled down his face. "And I felt you die," he whispered. Tears were sliding down my own cheeks. And this beautiful, wonderful thing that had come into my life, this gift from the cauldron, it was gone. In my desperation, I clung to that bond. Not the bargain. The bargain was nothing. The bargain was like a cobweb. But I grabbed that bond between us and I tugged. I willed you to hold on, to stay with me, because if we could get free, then all 7 of us were there.
I love this word, the use of this word tugged in Rhys's monologue here, because it's in italics, yes, but from under the mountain, Feyre's POV, quote, "Our bond went taut." I love this idea that he tugged on the bond so much that it tightened in her mind, and she felt the tug of it.
Like physically,
physically
exactly.
felt the tug.
Yeah. Feyre reflects in her POV here in chapter 54, quote, "Home had been at the end of the bond, I told the bone carver. Not Tamlin, not the spring court, but Rhysand."
Also, you can't help but think of, when you hear him say, quote, "And this beautiful, wonderful thing that had come into my life, this gift from the cauldron, it was gone." You can't help but think about Rhys's greatest fear. The things I love have a tendency to be taken away from me. There was that moment literally coming to life for him in real time, hence why he and fighting like nobody's business in the throne scene, just like eating and fighting for 50 years. And here he is losing yet another thing that he is cared about so deeply.
And we won't get too far ahead of ourselves right now, but the bargain that they make at the end of ACOWAR, we can make fun of them all day long,
and we will,
about how it was a stupid decision. However, this is the root of it. If you were going to die, I was going to die with you. They both felt this so deeply, so real, and they couldn't let it happen again. And they were willing to risk their own lives, forfeit their own lives, and have repercussions for all of those around them, because they cannot experience this again. Yeah. Going back to ACOTAR during this sequence, Feyre saw through Rhys's eyes after she died, seeing through his perspective, because as we now know, he had grabbed onto that bond and tugged, willing her to hold on, and that she did. He recognized the sacrifice she made with her last dying breath. She freed the Spring Court, therefore allowing Tamlin to go unhinged Man Bear Pig style and go up against Amarantha and kill her. With Amarantha gone, Rhys spoke to each High Lord mind to mind, convincing them to come forward and offer that spark of power to resurrect Feyre. None of them disagreed. Rhys notes that he thinks that they were too stunned to think of saying no. Note that he didn't force them to do this. He just asked them. But he was indeed prepared to make them if they refused. Continuing on in ACOTAR in the narrative from Feyre's POV, we know that Baron, High Lord of the Autumn Court, was the first to offer his glittering spark. We've speculated that we think he was first because Rhys knew he would be the most difficult to persuade. So he spoke mind to Baron first, kind of get the hardest one out of the way. Next up was Tarquin, High Lord of the Summer Court. And then Callias, High Lord of the Winter Court. Then Thesan, High Lord of the Dawn Court. Helion of the Day Court. With Rhysand being the final High Lord before Tamlin to give his grain of power to Feyre, cementing her resurrection. Quote, "For what she gave, will bestow what our predecessors have granted to few before," he said. But in reality, we now know he was the one who made this happen, had her resurrected in the first place because he couldn't bear the thought of her dying after all she had done for them, what she meant to Rhys personally. When Feyre awoke again, Rhys had to endure watching Tamlin love on her, kiss her. All Rhys wanted to do was go home to Velaris, where he hadn't been in 50 years, but he knew he couldn't yet until he knew that Feyre was all right. He waited as long as he could, aka he waited until after she and Tamlin banged, and then he could send a little tug down the bond, which, by the way, that's very respectful of their privacy. We don't know that he knew that's what they were doing, but come on. Can you imagine if she felt the tug while they were getting it on? Anyway.
She was like, excuse me, 1 second, excuse me.
Yeah. And from Feyre in ACOTAR, quote, "I was pulled from sleep by something tugging at my middle, a thread deep inside. She found her way to Rhys, perched on a balcony outside of Under the Mountain." Rhys goes on to say here in chapter 54, "I almost told you then, but you were so sad and tired, and for once you looked at me like I was worth something.
And what prompted Fae-vorite to look at him that way, in addition to literally everything he did in the throne room? When she asked in ACOTAR why, meaning, why did you try to save me? Rhys says, quote, because when the legends get written, I didn't want to be remembered for standing in the sidelines. I want my future offspring to know that I was there, that I fought against her at the end, even if I couldn't do anything useful, because I didn't want you to fight alone or die alone. Just like Fae-vorite didn't want the fairy from the summer court to die alone either after Amarantha had cut off his wings.
We've talked extensively on the podcast about Rhys and his feelings of self-worth and how Fae-vorite is in real time reshaping his own perception of his own self-worth. This is our first indicator of that. Even when they were considered enemies to lovers, Fae-vorite understood Rhys in a way few others did, and she wasn't scared of him or recoiled at him because from the get-go, she saw him for who he truly was. Now, Rhys had promised himself that he would free her of their bargain the next time they saw each other. Keep in mind that the bargain was his way in with Fae-vorite. It was not a means to control her or even have leverage over Tamlin. The bargain was specifically a way for him to have an in with Fae-vorite. Rhys ended up using this bargain to help her and to keep tabs on her well-being, which seemingly no one else was. Right before Rhys excused himself from this balcony conversation and left to go back to Velaris, something happened though. Quote from chapter 54, when I went to leave you, I think transforming you into Fae made the bond lock into place permanently. I'd known it existed, but it hit me so strong that I panicked. We remember this moment from Fae-vorite's POV, noticing when Rhys stumbled and his eyes became wide. This right here is what happened and what he realized. Their mating bond snapped into place.
From ACOTAR, quote, his eyes locked on mine, wide and wild, and his nostrils flared. Shock. Pure shock flashed across his features at whatever he saw in my face, and he stumbled back a step, actually stumbled. And then Rhys vanishes to the night court.
I assume that she didn't feel the mating bond snap into place because Fae-vorite didn't know any better, as we've also discussed a lot, that she just didn't know what any of that feeling would be, and so therefore it just didn't even register for her. After that pivotal moment on the balcony, Rhys winnowed back to the night court where Mor was waiting for him before he damned the consequences and take Fae-vorite with him. He didn't want Fae-vorite to hate him forever. And kidnapping her, because that is exactly what that would have been, kidnapping her in this fashion would definitely be bad. And his very first words after not seeing his beloved cousin for 50 years was, she's my mate, she's my mate. He was so frantic and unhinged from this revelation that he told Mor everything about Fae-vorite. Just imagine this. You haven't seen a loved one in 50 years. You didn't think you'd ever see them again. And you're preoccupied with discovering who your mate is when you do finally see your family again. This is huge news for Rhys that he's been waiting 500 years for. Yes, he subconsciously wondered it before when he was under the mountain, but now the mating bond has snapped into place. She is high fae. This is legit. And she's literally with another dude. Rhys is in a frenzy, and just like how Fae-vorite needed to process this last episode at the beginning of this one, Rhys had to then. Mor has always treated Fae-vorite like family, literally from their very first interaction, because she knows that ultimately Fae-vorite is family. She's one of the few people who have truly known that they're mates, and it's because he was so caught off guard and told her everything here. It was not necessarily strategic. It was just like,
remember Mor was almost like, oh, I was in Velaris, and Rhys was like, no. She saw the pain and the connection Rhys felt for Fae-vorite when Rhys winnowed back from under the mountain. And she wanted Fae-vorite, she meaning Mor, wanted Fae-vorite to feel as at home as possible so that she, Fae-vorite, could find a home here. For 3 months, Rhys sat to the side trying to convince himself that she was better off without him in her life. And at the beginning of this book, Fae-vorite, after a midnight vomit session, she wonders if Rhys possibly forgot about their bargain since she hasn't seen or heard a whisper from him. Quite the opposite to Fae-vorite, darling. Just at the top of this chapter here, chapter 54, Fae-vorite looks at Rhys and thinks, quote, this beautiful, strong, selfless male who had sacrificed and wrecked himself for his family, his people, and didn't feel it was enough, that he wasn't enough for anyone. For 3 months, Rhys was using the, I'm going to call it what it is, excuse of convincing himself that she was better off without him. Even hearing that she was going to be married to someone else, he believed that he would just sit back and let her be happy. Quote, even if you were my mate, you had earned that happiness.
Note that after 5 centuries, he still doesn't think he has earned happiness.
Remember that he's constantly worried about whoever his partner is. This is before he realized Fae was his mate, that they would not want the role of partner or mate of the High Lord because of what that meant for their livelihood going forward.
And continuing on that too, he convinced himself that everything he had done to her under the mountain led her to hate him, which is true. As he said, he played his role too well because she clearly did hate him.
Through their bond, he felt her pain and sadness and loneliness in the spring court. These were all things that he was struggling with in the night court when he came back. We learned from Amren in chapter 43 of ACOMAF that Rhys was a ghost when he came back. It was only Feyre that made him come alive again. Rhys's chapter 54 download then moves to Feyre's wedding. Now, Rhys had every intention of getting absolutely shit-stick drunk with Cassian, who had no idea why his brother wanted to get absolutely obliterated on a very certain day, which I want to pause real quick and debate. Do we really think that Cassian had no idea? I'm assuming that maybe he thought that this is just what Rhys needed after coming back from under the mountain.
Yes, I don't think that Cassian had any idea. And he started to suspect after Feyre had come into their lives, but not before that.
I don't think so.
It is a little bit surprising that Rhys didn't give any clues as to why he was so upset to his best friends.
Yeah.
It's showing that as much as he loves his brothers, he doesn't let them in completely. He only shows his true whole self with Feyre.
Well, I do wonder if he had, and I'm assuming he probably wondered this as well. What if Rhys had told Cassian and Azriel about Feyre?
They would have gone. They would have been guys, we're going field trip. Yeah, we gotta go. We gotta go get her.
Exactly. So I understand why Rhys, with his logic, didn't tell them. It's a very Rhysand thing to do. But before Rhys on this wedding day could go from pleasantly fuddled to entirely sloshed, he heard her panic and despair through their bond. From chapter 4 of A Court of Mist and Fury, quote, "Help me, help me, help me. I begged someone, anyone. Begged Lucian standing in the front row, his metal eye fixed on me. Begged Ianthe, face serene and patient and lovely within that hood. Save me, please, save me. Get me out, end this." Was that italics calling our name? Why, yes, it was. Feyre was speaking to him down the bond, even though she didn't know it. And Rhys lost it and winnowed to the wedding, not remembering that he was supposed to don this metaphorical mask or that he was supposed to have like the High Lord of the Night Court facade on. He was acting entirely on instincts to protect his mate.
I just gotta say, it's a really good thing. Even in this instinctual state of mind, he was smooth as a cucumber. You never would have thought that he had like no idea what he was saying or doing, or that he had forgotten everything. Like, it seemed very cunning, very strategic, very on brand for Rhys.
At this wedding in chapter 5, quote, "Rhys looked me over slowly and clicked his tongue at my silk gloves. We now know that it's not because he disliked her fashion choices, or I should say Ianthe's fashion choices. No, instead, it was because she was so thin and pale." And yes, he does say, "in your stupid wedding dress." So he does not like the fashion choices. He wanted to murder Tamlin and the rest of the spring court for letting her wither away like this and for not seeming to care. Rhys made quick moves to get her out of the spring court and into the night court. From chapter 54, quote, "I had to get you out, had to call in that bargain just once to get you away, to see if you were all right." While in their first week in the night court, it was not necessarily friendly, I'll call it. He one-sided joked with her, made her angry, told her about her powers, giving her crucial information as to who she is now as a High Fae. And then he did leave her to mull it over. He gave her own autonomy over her life again, whether she took it or not. But Rhys sent her back after their week together, and it absolutely killed him. It killed him to see her waste away month by month. It killed him to not feel anything down their bond, with the exception of bursts of terror, knowing that it was Tamlin who caused it. It was killing him knowing that Tamlin was sleeping with her, sleeping next to her, and having sex with her. Quote, "Not just because you were my mate, but because I knew I was in love with you. from that moment I picked up the knife to kill Amarantha.
We talked about this moment a few minutes ago and how, yes, he knew in this moment that she was his mate and that was the driving force for him to go and kill Amarantha. But being mates and being in love are two separate things that we will get to in today's Suriel Teatime. He loved Feyre for who she was and what she sacrificed. In chapter 55, jumping ahead just a little bit here, he'll reflect that he thinks he fell in love with her even earlier than this moment of him grabbing the knife to go kill Amarantha. During her first trial, when he realized she was cleaving the bones to make a trap for the Middengard worm, or the moment she flipped him off for mocking her. Quote, "For the first time in decades, I wanted to laugh." Feyre is more than a mate for Rhys. She truly is his romantic match as well, and he knew it then because she was one of the inner circle, one of the family. She wasn't afraid of him, and she cemented her spectacular victory with a big fuck you to Amarantha. He felt Cassian's spirit beside him in that moment, and Rhys could almost hear Cassian say, "If you don't marry her, you prick, I will."
What a plot twist that would be. I gotta also say, I think that the moment where she picked up the bone, threw it at Amarantha, like all of that was the moment he fell in love with her. The moment he knew he was in love with her was when he picked up the knife to kill Amarantha. Just like she's been falling in love with him for a very long time, but she knew she was in love with him on Starfall. I wanted to make that differentiator because it does feel inconsistent until you look at it that way. Rhys decided, though, that when she made her night court visits, he would not tell her about how he felt, and he would not tell her that their bond was very much not just a bargain, which he wouldn't let her out of because her hatred was worth being able to be connected with her still. And her hatred was better than her feeling nothing towards him. Or from chapter 54, quote, "that you might feel something similar. And if I let myself love you, you would be taken from me." During these 2 separate weeks that she stayed in the night court, Rhys was gone a lot of the times, on night court business. But I do wonder if this is a reason why, so that she wouldn't feel something similar. And therefore, just like his belief of those I love have a tendency of getting taken away from me, she would then thus get taken away from him. So he didn't tell her. And he says, quote, "I watched as you faded away." I actually beg to differ. He was the only one who gave Feyre a goal to reach for again. He was not watching her fading away. He was actively trying to keep her tied to reality. He also opened her mind to the fact that she was so much more powerful than she was led to believe by members of the Spring Court. And even when she was at her absolute lowest, he, and only he, was able to get a rise of emotion out of her versus the nothing and the vacancy she was feeling everywhere else.
I have to wonder how long he would have let the bargain go for, knowing how bad of shape she was in the Spring Court. Potentially years? I don't know. This is just a genuine rhetorical question. He had reserved himself to loving Feyre from afar, to protect her heart. And he was prepared to keep it one-sided and help her as he could. Like Nicole was saying, he wasn't just watching her on the sidelines. He was actively helping her however he could in his capacity. He was willing to be a light in her life for however long. And I have to wonder how long that would have been.
I also have to wonder how long until he would have introduced her to Cassian, Azriel, Amren. He already introduced her to more, but I think long before Rhys would have ended the bargain, Feyre would have fallen in love with the Night Court and the Inner Circle, and she would have left the Spring Court.
I agree. I could see it being where like Cassian and Azriel and maybe even Amren would come to the Moonstone Palace because he needed that separation with Velaris. Like if she had any connection and ties to Tamlin, especially going back to the Spring Court, he could not risk her going to Velaris. So he would bring the Inner Circle to, and I can just totally imagine that whole scenario. Oh my gosh. Anyway.
Can you imagine Tamlin and Lucian's face when she came back? She's like, yeah, I met these 2 guys. Their names are Cassian and Azriel. Tamlin and Lucian are like, fuck! Then came the day where Tamlin locked her up. And Rhys admits that he broke some very fundamental rules by taking her away. And we've discussed this on the podcast, how this is a little inconsistent. But my guess is that this here is the truth. We heard the different version where Moore mentions how everything was by the book and therefore we should be good, right? But even how Cressida acted in the summer court around Tamlin having every right to wage war on them, my guess is that Rhys definitely did break some rules here.
My takeaway is that Mor did everything by the book in retrieving a Fae who belonged to another court. But this was ultimately way more complicated than that because Feyre was a High Lord's bride who was seemingly stolen away. Tamlin didn't immediately wage war against Rhys, though it seems that was inevitable from what Lucien tells us about warring against the Night Court while allied with Hybern versus 2 wars, one with the Night Court and one with Hybern. I think Tamlin didn't immediately wage war because it wasn't Rhys who came in himself. And so yes, Rhys broke fundamental rules because you aren't supposed to take someone from the High Lord's residence like that. But when Mor says that she did everything by the book, it makes it a gray area with Feyre's departure versus an absolute, let's go to war right now against Rhys. And again, like it could also just be that plot inconsistency. It could be the limited narration. And like you said, that this is indeed the real true version of it. But because Tamlin did not immediately go to war up against the Night Court, he could have also just been scared and knew he needed an ally.
He would have never survived that war. Like I think
no, not at all.
Lucien would know that a war of Spring Court versus Night Court would have trampled them. So I think that's another reason why he went to Hybern instead.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, but I like to think that Mor made it a gray area where if Rhys had done it, that would have been a real line in the sand.
However, Amren, she's got the ultimate solve button, and Rhys says it here in chapter 54. Just tell everyone that you're mates, and it will keep trouble, specifically Spring Court trouble, from our door. But Rhys couldn't do it. After 3 months under the mountain of forcing so much on her, he didn't want to force her into a bond, especially a bond this impactful to her mortal life, even if it gave Tamlin license to wage war. Again, a war he definitely would have lost. Actually, that might have been faster if they just had, like, if they just provoked him to wage war. And I don't know how Feyre would have responded to that, but just a thought. From chapter 54, quote, I didn't want you to think that everything I did was to win you, just to keep my lands safe. What was the curse on the Spring Court? Make a mortal fall in love with you to save your lands. He didn't want to remind her of the start of her relationship with Tamlin, or to start their relationship, whatever it may be, with deception.
And that goes back to he loved her beyond being mates. And if Feyre was indeed going to be his mate, he hoped that she could return that love. Not because they were mates and she would be attached to him, which would be out of her control, but because Feyre chose him, loved all of him. That's really all he's wanted in this world. It's also what he's most afraid of. And oh, by the way, you love me? Yay, we're mates too. Huzzah!
He couldn't stop loving her. He couldn't stop being around her. And he says, quote, I still can't stay away. And with a long breath out, Rhys leans back in his chair, officially done with his tale. Feyre, slowly walking over to him, bowl in hand, places the soup in front of him. She says, quote, you love me? Out of words, Rhys nods. And she wonders if love was too weak a word for what he felt for her, and what she indeed felt for him. From Feyre, quote, then eat. My fucking heart. Oh, we did it. All right, next chapter. Rhys eats the entire bowl of soup in silence and finally looks at Feyre with a, quote, aren't you going to say anything? Poor Rhys. He's just like, hello, I just gave you a 17-page monologue. Can you please say something? This is like when you say, this is exactly like actually, when you say, I love you, and there's a long silence, like for the first time, and you're like, oh, fuck. Oh, all right. Like I didn't propose, but I would imagine if you're proposing to someone, that beat before they say yes or whatever their answer is would feel like the longest beat in your entire life. That's why I interrupted my husband to say fuck yes.
So I will say, in her defense, that's a lot to process.
That's a good point.
I don't think I would have an immediate response either. I'd be like, okay, give me a few minutes here. Like, let me just kind of let all that sit just a little bit here. Like, even us as readers, like, whew, that's a lot to process. In fact, this is a nice little break for all of our readers. We can laugh together. We can process all of that we just went through. How's everybody doing? Are you good?
How are we feeling? Who's got the tissues?
But Feyre has a beautiful and touching response after she takes a few moments to like process all. And I don't mean process in like a how do I accept, but just let
it sink in.
17 pages of a monologue. Yeah. She has had 5 days to sit in her thoughts and process that they are mates. She's had that time to dream of a future with him and what living a happy life with this found family would look like. Yes, she knew she loved him already when he opened up the door, and you know how she said, I already knew what I was going to say when you arrived on the threshold. And she anticipated accepting that mating bond before his story. But she also needed to hear all of this so that they can fully enter this next chapter, literally together, with everything out on the table with that full transparency. Quote, "Now I want you to know, Rhysand, that I love you. I want you to know that I am broken and healing, but every piece of my heart belongs to you. And I am honored to be your mate." She'll say shortly that deep down, she knew she fell in love with him on Starfall. And now she can fully accept it in her heart and say it out loud to him. She couldn't admit it even to herself previously because of the guilt and that damn rule book of shoulds regarding Tamlin. As Feyre says, quote, "But it had nothing to do with you, Rhys. I was never afraid of the consequences of being with you. Even if every assassin in the world hunts us, it's worth it. You are worth it." And oh my goodness, my heart is bursting at this reply as he hoarsely replies back, "Thank you." Rhys has spent his life thinking the opposite, terrified of what loving him means for his mate, his family, and his friends. He is so self-sacrificing because he doesn't feel he is worth it. But now his mate loves him with her whole heart, with all that she has to offer. And she is not afraid of loving him, despite understanding what it may mean. She is courageous to face what the future has in store for both of them, because being together and loving each other makes anything that comes their way worth it.
God damn it, Lexi.
Rhys has been her constant these past months. He has been there for her when all felt lost. He has been that beacon of light and aid in navigating the darkness within her. They have built a friendship where they can comfortably be their true selves with one another, broken pieces and all. As we've said before, this is what is so beautiful about this book. Experiencing this blossoming friendship and healing journey for these two, being right there every step of the way. And I love how in this stretch, she calls him both her mate and friend, because their friendship does mean everything to her. And without that friendship, she would not have been able to fall in love with him as deeply as she has. Now, there are no more secrets. They are officially on the other side where they can openly tell each other everything, which makes chapter 55 so impactful. It has been so built up because, wow, they each deserve this happiness, basking in this love for each other, feeling like they have all the time in the world after everything they've endured individually and together. Going back to the top of this chapter again here, it is so touching to see Rhys here in this moment after he vulnerably laid his heart out. He's crying, and when she says he is hers, quote, his body shuddered with what might have been a sob. Rhys is so relieved, so happy. There aren't words to describe what he is feeling in this moment after 500 years of being alone and misunderstood, at least when it comes to lovers. We are not discounting his friendships, but when it comes to lovers, he has been very alone and misunderstood.
Rhys begins to kiss her, gentle and soft. Quote, "The kiss he might have given me if we'd been granted time and peace to meet across our two separate worlds. Even though this is technically their third kiss, this is the kiss that Rhys wanted their first to be like. The reason he wanted to take the kiss back from under the mountain, so that they could have this meeting across worlds moment together. But then the kiss deepens."
And before I let Nicole just completely loose with this chapter, I want to take a moment and acknowledge why chapter 55 is extra special for so many readers. For many of us, ACOTAR was our first romantasy series, and while we had several sex scenes in ACOTAR, this is the signature scene that truly immerses you in it and takes you on an emotional journey. Before this book, I had read plenty of other books with a sex scene in it here and there, but none of them can hold a candle to this iconic scene that is just so near and dear to so many readers. Because chapter 55 is not about the sex itself, although as wonderful as that is, it's not about the sex itself. It's about being wrapped up in the emotions and the romance and the completeness in a way few of us have read before. Yeah. It's the emotional climax, get it, after chapter 54, and it's the perfect follow-up to this incredibly significant scene that celebrates Rhys and Feyre's love and their joining of souls. And now it's literally and figuratively.
With Feyre wrapping her legs around Rhys, he lays her down on the counter, on top of all the paints. It is so fitting that the start to their sex scene is on top of paint. It is even more fitting that they're covered in it by the time they even move to the bedroom. Painting is such an integral part of Feyre's life. And now that she alone has gotten to heal just moments before, this is now the true celebration of her coming, wink, back to life. Also, Rhys, this is one of my favorite moments of the scene. He paints a downward arrow on her stomach and says, quote, "Lest you forget where this is going to end." Slow clap for you, sir. You know he's just been waiting for this moment. And covered in paint, Rhys gets onto his knees and kneels before Feyre. Quote, "Knelt on those stars and mountains inked on his knees. He would bow for no one and nothing but his mate, his equal." While yes, the scene is sexy as hell, this is also so poetically beautiful. He has done everything for his court, his family, to keep them safe. And here he is getting to choose to get on his knees for a woman, not for duty or keeping any people safe, but instead for pleasure. And here, Rhys, here's your personal feast buddy, and he doesn't hold back.
In their previous sexually charged moments, Feyre consistently wanted more. There had been this anticipation buildup, and here she and us readers, I'll say, are satisfied completely. You know, there is still that language where she can't get enough of him, but she does get that more. The language subtly shifts from that plead for more to a promise for more.
Yes. As much as I would like to just read this entire scene into a mic, and some of you have expressed a similar sentiment, and I appreciate that. But instead, I'm going to take a different approach and highlight key moments and what they mean for Feyre and Rhys's love story. Rhys brings her into the bedroom naked and wings out. And yes, this is our most important wing watch to date. Here, Feyre notes that this is a vulnerability and a yielding to another that he would only do with his mate, his equal. Remember when she asks him about his wings during sex out, and I think a few episodes ago, Rhys says, quote, "It makes you vulnerable in a way I'm not comfortable with." This is him showing her, you, Feyre, I am comfortable to be my full self with you. Take that wings out virginity, Feyre. But enough playing. It's time to take that final step and solidify this mating bond. As they join together, Feyre says over and over, quote, "You're mine." And this, again, is something that, just makes me kick my legs up in the air when I'm reading books. And I'm not going to lie, if someone said this to me in real life, I'd be like, that's a lot. And
I'd be the same way.
Like, whoa, little clingy. But this is what Nesta says when she and Cassian solidify their mating bond in Silver Flames, which this is before she offers him food. And my type A enjoying, I like to have steps 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And my mind gets slightly confused on the order of operations. But then, quote, "I felt it then, the bond between us, like an unbreakable chain, like an undimmable ray of light. With each pounding stroke, the bond glowed clearer and brighter and stronger. And the mating bond is here to stay, friends." Quote again, "My friend through many dangers, my lover who had healed my broken heart and weary soul, my mate who had waited for me against all hope, despite all odds." Rhys says he loves her, and they both finish. Rhys with a roar that makes an avalanche outside, which I'm hoping that there were no hikers, or else R.I.P. Like, goodbye. And Feyre feels the bond become alive even deeper. Quote, "I felt and saw and smelled that bond between us until our scents merged, and I was his and he was mine, and we were the beginning and middle and end." So actually, I was debating whether or not to put this in, so I'm gonna go ahead and speak to it, because up until this point, we've had 3 moments where there's no end and no beginning language, and it was always around Rhys's powers and solely around Rhys. But here we are getting the beginning, middle, and end, a full story, and it's with them together, not just Rhys, them together. And I like that language shift there. Now, friends, I have written several love letters to smut. That was officially twice now on this podcast. Once for how reading these types of books helps us with busy brains who maybe have a hard time having sex in the forefront. How these books can remind us that we can enjoy, crave, and be 100% feral for sex. The second love letter was more for female empowerment. For many of us, after being told to be ashamed of our bodies, and that led to a lot of us having insecurity in the bedroom. Books like these remind us that we are able to be seen fully, laid out completely bare, and how it can be hot as hell, enjoyable, and honestly wildly hot for both parties. And while both of these topics are absolutely applicable here, this love letter I want to write here is actually not for the sex itself, but is instead for romance and friendship. Because to me, that is really what this chapter is about. It's not hard and fast and carnal, and don't get me wrong, there are absolutely those scenes in literature, and we love to talk about them, and we have talked about them. But this scene here, chapter 55, it is about connection. It is about them fully becoming an us and a true partnership. It's about them relishing in their love together and letting it quite literally glow. When you're in a long-term relationship or in a busy season of life, taking little moments to show that romance and true solidarity with your partner, it can take a back burner sometimes. We're human. It happens. You have kids who are taking up your time and energy. You have busy work projects that are causing you stress. A family member needs a lot of attention from you at this moment. When these inevitable feelings come up for us in life, it can be really hard to take that time and appreciation for our partner. But one of the reasons this scene and really this love story changed my life personally is because it reminded me how important it is to lean into that romance and that full partnership with my husband, to compliment him, to take an extra beat when we hug and really be present with him, to tell him that he is my best friend and I love him so very much, to support him and listen to him even when he has hard days, to give us both time and space to be vulnerable and nothing but our truest selves. This scene is so much bigger than smut. It is a reminder for us to show your partner how much they mean to you, whether it's through little actions, an extra kiss before you leave for the day, giving them a smile like Fae-vorite does to Rhys, talking about your future, or connecting physically and really enjoying that time you have with just the two of you. So all in all, thank you, ACOMAF, for reminding us to be actively and consciously the type of partners we want to be every day. In the bath! After their coupling, Fae-vorite, being our future-looking goal-getter, asks, what's next? Rhys, thinking she means about their relationship, lays out the options for her. And again, telling her it's up to her. Again, that theme of choice presents itself into the story. However, I will say this. He is letting her decide he is being that selfless person that he is at his core, and he's wanting to make sure that she is happy as possible. But Rhys, my guy, this is also your relationship too. 100, baby. He tells her that they can go back to Velaris and have the bond verified by a priestess and get declared officially mated. He tells them that they can also have a small party with their friends, or even a large party, although he assumes that they both have an aversion to them. Or they can go in front of a priestess and be declared husband and wife in addition to being declared as mates, if Fae-vorite wants a more human thing to call him. Although Rhys will be calling her mate, wife does sound pretty appealing too. Or they can wait and do none of those things. From Rhys, quote, "We're mated. Whether it's shouted across the world or not, there's no rush to decide." They will ultimately go to a priestess and be declared mates and co-high lord/lady of the Night Court. Then they will exchange rings when she returns from the Spring Court in ACOWAR. Fae-vorite does mention wanting to have a big party and invite everyone in Velaris in the later chapters of A Court in Mist and Fury, but I don't think their party ever happens.
I don't think so. I think the whole, attack on Velaris and the war and all of that kind of had a
and then the baby. And then
yeah.
But Rhys, she was actually meaning what's next with the queens. Oh, they go to the Mortal Lands tomorrow to meet with them in 3 days' time.
And I love how she's like, wait, what? Like, why didn't you mention this? And Rhys is like, well, I got a little sidetracked. And it's like, yeah, you did.
I honestly can't blame him the slightest. He's like, I had a little bit of a higher priority of making sure my mate wasn't pissed as hell at me. So there you go.
Yeah.
Fae-vorite looks at the joy in Rhys's eyes and thinks, quote, "A future. We would have a future together. I would have a future, a life." And Fae-vorite begins to glow with happiness, which makes them both feral.
I love how much the future between them is in this stretch of chapters, calling back to when she realized she envisioned a future with Rhys before his arrival at the cabin. It's not just loving each other now. It's actively looking ahead at their immortal lives and being excited to share a future together.
Putting Feyre on the bed, Rhys removes the glamour on his power and fills the room with glittering ebony darkness, wind, and stars. Rhys lays a dark rippled hand on Feyre's glowing skin. Quote, "That hand of night's blade, the light leaking through the wafting shadows." As they both near their climaxes, Rhys chooses to have her on top of him where, with her glow, she can fully drown out the darkness of him. Quote, "And I understood why he wanted me like this, wanted to end it like this, with me astride him. And it broke my heart. I leaned forward to kiss him softly, tenderly." Rhys has been shrouded in darkness for so much of his life. And while he's found peace in most of it, having his mate literally shine the darkness away from his life is so beautiful. From Feyre, quote, "But I would glow. For him, I'd glow. For my own future, I'd glow." With these two having a future they are excited for after so much pain and darkness, they deserve the happiness that the glow represents. So Feyre banishes the, quote, "stained darkness with the light," letting it drive out the darkness of what had been done to him. My mate, my friend. There's that friend language again. But one of my favorite moments of this chapter is Rhys saying, quote, "And I have every intention of making you as happy as a person can be. I have a feeling we're going to need to learn to control that wondrous glow."
And as our two frenzied bunnies are forcing themselves to eat substance to, have energy the next morning, the subject of pregnancy comes up. Quote, "Might as well have thrown a bucket of ice over both of us." So these two discuss the possibility of children. Remember that Feyre was brought up in a wealthy family, always seeking higher political status. And then we, of course, can't forget the experience in the Spring Court, where literally all she was expected to do was sit pretty and bear Tamlin's children. So it's really a little heartbreaking when she says, "If I am a High Lord's mate, I'm expected to bear you offspring, aren't I? So perhaps I shouldn't." Shouldn't meaning take the tonic. No regard for what she personally wants or is ready for, just what's expected of her. She's really going back to that old habit there because it's so ingrained over her throughout her entire life.
Well, she's going right back to those shoulds. I should bear offspring for you.
Yep.
Ugh.
And thankfully, Rhys, the ultimate book boyfriend, shuts that kind of talk down. Quote, "You are not expected to bear me anything," italics there on anything. And he goes on to emphasize that having children is Feyre's choice when and if she ever is ready for it. He admits right now might be some really bad timing, with the war and all, which, yes, very good point, Rhys. Feyre says that she wants to live first and experience this life with Rhys, what it means to be immortal, to be his mate, and to be part of this family. I'm not going to touch on this too much right now because it will be a big part of our Frost and Starlight deep dive, but as we know from the end of that novella, Feyre changes her mind. Only months after this conversation, she will indeed be ready to start trying for a baby. And a lot of the fandom questions Feyre's decision to so quickly change her mind and want to have children. I am actually going to be in her corner and argue how and why the events in ACOWAR change her mind and make it realistic for our story. And at the end of the day, who are any of us to get mad that a character changes her mind about when she's ready to have kids after life-altering events that lead her to make that decision? Again, I will talk about that after ACOWAR when we are talking about Frost and Starlight. Right now, before war is at their doorstep, when this mating bond and being part of this family feels so wholly new to her, her decision to wait makes absolute sense, of course. She is young, so young in her immortal life, and as we've said, this stretch of chapters embraces the future. She feels like they do have forever to live. Previously, the concept of immortality terrified her, but now she looks at it with optimism and hope because her future is with Rhys. It makes sense that in this moment, this is her outlook on living life with Rhys and continuing to discover herself and heal. And after the events of the war that will forever change them, her outlook will change. And in my personal opinion, that is totally okay. For Feyre, for anyone choosing when or when not they're ready to have children. But because you all know me and I love me some Daddy Rhys, I have to end this monumental Cauldron section with this line. Quote, "I would be happy beyond reason, though, if you one day did honor me with children, to share that with you." Their children, not his, not even calling them offspring, but sharing a family together. BRB, I gotta go give my sexy daddy Jake a hug.
Well, in that language of to share that with you.
Yes.
I do not know what that feeling to share another human's well-being. I'm making it sound so unromantic, but I don't know what that feeling is like. But I assume, and Lexi, correct me if I'm wrong, this brings you and your partner together in a way that you never would expect you to ever be. Yes, it's new challenges, but it's also a connection you can never experience any other way.
Like, some of my favorite moments in my day-to-day life are our kids playing in the backyard, and Jake just puts his arm around me and we just watch our family. And we have worked so hard to get to where we are now in our life. And a lot of things didn't go according to plan. And yet here we are, overcoming all these challenges and sharing this family together. And I do think that, going back to Thera and Rhys here, they're young, and she's young, I guess. And this is also new. And again, like, I really do defend her in the sense that she is allowed to change her mind, as any of us are allowed to change our minds in whatever our decision is, especially based on the experiences that are unfortunately going to happen in ACOWAR.
I'm so proud of you. Wow. Fuck me. God damn it. I'm glad I put the tissues next to my desk for this episode.
Well, friends, I know we're not done with this episode yet, but again, like, we kind of gave you a little bit of a sneak peek into how anxious we were for this episode. And it feels so crazy that we just went through it. Yeah. And we really hope that we did it justice. And that we were all able to walk through chapter 54, both in a familiar and in new ways. And thank you so much for being on this journey with us. But as always, we're not done yet. While we already highlighted key foreshadowing moments, let's turn our full attention onto foreshadowing for the rest of this book and other important moments in the series.
Mor says that murdering her parents would be a perfect winter solstice gift for Cassian and Asriel. Maybe Mor only has 2 different gift ideas, like the perfect gift, like murder, or things that are absolutely terrible, like a floofy t-shirt or a floofy button down for Cassian.
I love how bad she is at giving gifts. Like, it is such a fun, random thing about her.
I love it. We will learn from Rhys the importance of a mate offering up food and how, some people make a huge occasion of it with a party and everything. Shouts to Cassian and Nesta's mating party, which moneybags Rhys makes, like, make sure not a single expense is spared for. I love it.
Thera is a master manifester at work. Her goal of teaching art, having her own shop where others who are, quote, broken in places and trying to fight it, trying to learn who they were around the darkness and pain so that they can learn to paint. This actually happens, and it's so exciting to see her real future after the terribleness of ACOWAR actually come to fruition, and it's just so beautiful.
And last but not least, Feyre mentions how she wants to be ready for children before having them, which she will be. She will have the major I am ready for kids realization in A Court of Frost and Starlight, which we will discuss in detail when we get to it. And I'm really excited to discuss that, actually. I can't freaking wait.
I am too. When I first read Frost and Starlight, I really... You know me, I struggled through it. And a lot of our listeners are like, why are you even deep diving it? And when I did it on a reread, I actually originally told Nicole, we are only doing 1 episode for Frost and Starlight. You cannot get my butt in a...
You said, I will only give you 1 episode of Frost and Starlight.
And after I reread it and had that new perspective of her, wanting children and all of that. And just like as a mom, I am actually really excited to talk about how impactful that novella is, and hopefully to give our listeners a new appreciation as well for that novella. Because is it one of the best ACOTAR books? No, just because the rest of the series is so phenomenal, and it really does serve its purpose. And you get that first real little sliver of that here when they're talking about children.
Yes, but it is time to sip some tea with the Suriel. Every episode, Lexi takes some time. She sits down, she captures it with a chicken or a cloak, and she sits with the Suriel to walk through a world-building topic to help us better understand this world and the people in it.
Today's Suriel topic is mates and mating bonds. So mates are 2 individuals who share a very special and rare bond called the mating bond. Imagine the concept of soulmates, but it goes even deeper with a tangible and territorial territorial bond tethering these two mates together. To be mates means that the two are equals, but note that this does not necessarily mean that they are romantically matched. More on that in a little while. The primal idea behind mates being equals is that their pairing will create the strongest offspring. An accepted mating bond is the highest level of connection between two individuals. It is far stronger and more sacred than a married couple. To be mates essentially means that you're married, although vice versa, if you're married, that does not mean that you're automatically mates. Mated couples can choose to have a formal marriage ceremony, but again, their mating bond triumphs a traditional marriage. There is a link between the minds of these two fae, represented as a bridge or a string or a tether. This link enables mates to feel the other's emotions through the bond, but I think it is safe to assume Feyre and Rhys's bond, where they can mentally communicate, is unique to them because they are both Damati. I say that this is safe to assume because we also get insight into Cassian and Nesta's POVs after their mating bond snaps into place, and they cannot mind-to-mind communicate with each other the same way that Feyre and Rhys can because they are not Damati. The mating bond can reveal itself at different times depending on the couple. For some, it snaps into place right when the two meet, like Lucien for Elaine or Rhys's father with his mother. But for others, it can take years before the bond is discovered. For example, Vivian and Callias. In the ACOTAR world, we have mostly seen mating bonds between male and female couples, but we do know that same-sex mates are possible. We learn from this book that the female must offer the male food to accept the mating bond. Unfortunately, we haven't seen how this works in same-sex partnerships, but we hope to in the future. The offering of food is essential for the mating bond, but it should be noted that it is more of a symbolic nature, deeply rooted in their culture and society, versus the biological impact of securing the bond that consummation has. This offering of food can be performed in a public mating ceremony or privately, where only the couple is present and the female heats up some soup while the male gives the most epic monologue in all of fantasy literature. In public mating ceremonies, the mates swear their vows in front of a priestess and offer each other food. Then their friends and family bind their hands together with a length of black ribbon that remains until the mating is consummated. Speaking of consummation, let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Once the mating bond is accepted, the couple goes absolutely feral for one another. And when they consummate the mating bond, saying that they're each other's, you're mine, the bond fully solidifies. There's the mating bond when it snaps into place, and then there's this, an accepted mating bond where that tether between the two of them fully strengthens and becomes tangible, like I mentioned earlier. In this moment in chapter 55, Feyre notes, quote, "I felt it then, the bond between us, like an unbreakable chain, like an undimmable ray of light." She'll be able to feel and see and smell the bond between them, which, yes, smell. When the mating bond is consummated, how many times am I going to say that in this stretch? Their sense merge. Again, being mates is a biological connection and merging of selves between two people. This period where they can't keep their hands off of each other is called the frenzy, that can last from a few days to a couple of weeks. And the males get so volatile that it can literally be dangerous for them to be out in public because the frenzy makes them extraterritorial of their mate. Males of reason and education have been known to attack other males because the other male looked for too long in the direction of his mate too soon after the accepted mating bond. So why does this frenzy happen? Well, it goes back to the beasts that the Fae once were, and is probably about ensuring the male impregnates the female. Being mates does not mean that the couple will be in love, or that they'll live happily ever after. In fact, what Rhys and Feyre have is rather rare. We know of plenty of other instances where at least one of the mates is unhappy with the other. Rhys's mother and father, Tamlin's parents, Elaine with Lucien. Mating bonds can be rejected. If a male is rejected by a female, the loss of his mate can literally drive him to madness. If the bond snaps between two individuals and one is already married, the situation must be treated very delicately. The male will always have this intrinsic sense of entitlement to his mate, and he could go as far as waging a duel or even a war against their chosen lover. In the Autumn Court specifically, a male can invoke what is called the blood duel. If one of the mated pairs dies, the loss is just absolutely unbearable for the other. It feels like they have lost a part of their soul, and the surviving mate may decide that they don't wish to live without their other half, or they avenge their mate's death like Rhys's father did for his mother. Now you might ask, how does this work with mates of different species or races? And the answer is it's complicated. It is certainly possible for a Fae to have a mortal mate, but it is unknown if the mating bond can snap into place if the mortal mate is still human. For instance, Rhys suspected Feyre was his mate when she was human, but the mating bond snapped into place after she was made High Fae. Nesta and Elaine were both turned High Fae before their mating bonds snapped into place. We can assume Lucian hadn't met Elaine before the Cauldron scene at Highburns, but he didn't realize she was his mate until after she came out of the Cauldron versus the moments before when she first came into the room. The foreshadowing of Cassian and Nesta's mating bond was there right from their first interaction, but the mating bond didn't snap into place until a while after she became High Fae. Miriam, on the other hand, was half Fae, and therefore her mating bond with Draken snapped into place before she was resurrected and made immortal. Of course, mating bonds happen outside of just the High Fae and can be between fairy races and even other magical species. We have several examples of High Fae and Illyrians sharing mating bonds together. Alice's sister and brother-in-law were mates, and they were Urisk, which is a lesser fairy, and even Helion's prized Pegasus has a mate. And that, friends, is everything we need to know about mates.
Now, let us jump into our Fae-vorite moments. My first one is Feyre getting up to the cabin and saying, quote, "I only wanted solitude and quiet, but ... a hot bath sounded like a nice way to start." Vibe.
I love everything about this mountain cabin, especially the homey touches. Old bits of ribbon. Like, do you think there's any connection to the Valkyries there? Weapons tucked away just everywhere. A stained cookbook and more weapons. I love this mountain cabin so much.
Feyre finds an outfit of dark leggings with a large cream sweater and thick socks. Again, I love the modern clothing in our story and how it appears. And I would 10 out of 10 wear this outfit. That sounds like something you and I would actually, that sounds like you and I actually
I'm pretty
own that.
sure we both have this outfit.
Halfway through her first day at the cabin, Feyre gets supremely, unrelentingly bored. Again, such a relatable moment. And, quote, "It made me nosy." Who's surprised? Who's fucking surprised? Another favorite moment, all of the paints come from Amren, one summer where she wished to learn how to paint. Quote, "She did it for about 2 days before she got bored and decided to hunt poor creatures instead." Another novella I need. I need this so badly.
I also love this one more little connection between her and Feyre. Like we already talked about it, I think it was last episode, with Devlin thinking that Feyre is as powerful and the same kind of creature as Amren, and how that's quite the compliment. Feyre's paintings include icicles that melt into flowers of spring, then blooms into summer, and then moves into fall leaves. She's painting the seasons, something we know she loves having, and I just love that represented there.
We didn't discuss this in the episode because honestly we had way too much to talk about, and we've already talked so much about the Cassian, Mor, and Asriel dynamic. But there's one little detail of the conversation that I wanted to pull. Feyre asks if Mor is interested in Asriel, which Feyre, the horse is dead, fucking put the stick down. I'm so over her trying to beat this dead horse so much. Mor responds with, quote, "Why are you asking such things?" Her voice became tight, sharp, more wary than I'd ever heard. I love this bit of writing because Mor is stressing that Feyre is onto her, or at least prying a little too close to her secret. And this writing with how her tone changed, more wary than I'd ever heard. Mor telling Feyre to paint Asriel and Cassian's eyes next to hers and Amren's. Quote, "So we can all watch over you." Again, it's that family watching over their own. I also love how she meaning Mor, knew not to mention Rhys's name / eyes.
And when seeing the eyes over the threshold to the bedroom hallway, Rhys says, quote, "You do know that one of them is going to paint a mustache under the eyes of whoever pisses them off that day."
Is that the best line in this book? I think so.
It might be. It might be. Feyre comments how the rumors about wingspan correlating with the size of other parts, penis, were right. So I personally believe that more research must be done for this hypothesis. If Elaine
Lexi,
and
we know you want to sleep with all 3 bat boys, but come on.
Well, if Elaine and Asriel ever do get together, the Archeron sisters are going to have quite the discussion. Like, okay, like everybody pull out the pen and paper. Let's figure this out here right now.
Hand size in relation to hand.
As I was reading chapter 55, Jake was out and about. So I was like texting him and I was telling him about how I was reading a spicy chapter. And I told him about the considerable length and how it just sprung out of his pants. And I was like, and it goes boing. And then I mentioned how it was actually a really long chapter. And Jake's like, you mean this chapter 55 is of considerable length? And ever since then, he has been making multiple comments a day about things being considerable lengths. So yes,
so
chapter
funny.
55 is of considerable length because it is actually quite a long chapter.
It is a long chapter. It's almost the same length as 54. Just I think it's like a page or so different. Anyway, friends, we are about to begin our Maasverse Madness. I have been feral to get to this part of the episode. I'm so excited.
Today's Maasverse Madness includes spoilers for both Throne of Glass and Crescent City series. We are talking about concepts that happen at the end of both series. If you have not read both of those series, this is unfortunately where we part ways today. But before you go, reminder that next episode, we are going to be covering chapters 56 through 60. And if you want to go ahead, join the Patreon party, want to join us for his June book club and hang out with Penn Cole, find that link in the show notes or YouTube caption. Of course, as I always say, if you're not following us on social media, what are you doing? Give us a follow on TikTok and / or Instagram at Fantasy Fangirls Pod.
Also, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, especially on Apple Podcasts. If you can take a second and write a little love note in that review section, it is so incredibly helpful. Not just for us, though. Any podcast that you listen to, it is truly one of the best things that you can do to support the podcast. But the most important, the utmost importance is sharing this episode with your fellow ACOTAR friends. It's chapter 54. Share this episode with someone who also read this book and got just emotionally unhinged reading these chapters.
All right, we are now officially entering our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode where we call out series crossover references and discuss theories. Today, we are discussing concepts that give spoilers from the last books in both Throne of Glass and Crescent City.
I have a quick one before I get into the one I'm literally shaking to get to. I'm so excited. The first one is Mor in the cabin when she is joining Feyre in painting. She paints 3 stick figures on the wall that look, quote, just like her. The Morgan in Celtic mythology represents 3 sisters, but here, Mor in the cabin, she's also painting, 3 similar looking women on the wall. Who do the witches in Tog worship? The 3-faced goddess. So I do wonder if that is more of a witch parallel with Morgan or if it's more of a nod to Morgan in Celtic mythology and her roots there. But I like to think it's a witch nod because I'm so sold on that theory. I can't even tell you. Now, we need to talk about mating bonds in the other Maasverse series. We have learned all about mating bonds in the Prythian world, but what about the other 2 worlds? In Throne of Glass, when Aelin and Rowan, I'll call it solidify their mating bond, there is a moment where they bite each other's neck. And given that these Fae in Aurelia are so much more primal, more animalistic than our Prythian Fae, it does make sense. In Kingdom of Ash, quote from Aelin's perspective, mate. The word still sounded like a surprise. What they had done in that forest pool had been accumulation of those months and an unleashing. The mating marks on her neck and on Rowan's proved it. She would not be returning to Terrasen alone when autumn arrived. So we can assume that the mating bond snapping into place is more of like, I should say, is more emotional, just like it is with Rhys and Feyre. But I'm assuming that the mating mark on their necks is more of the soup in the Prythian world. It's more symbolic of like, I claim you. We also have in their Karanon bond scene, that could have also been where their bond snaps into place. They could tap into each other's powers, which we'll talk about more in a second. And in that scene in Heir of Fire, Rowan says, quote, I claim you too, Aelin Galathynius. It's very much along that you're mine language. So their mating bond might have actually snapped into place in Heir of Fire without either of them knowing for obvious reasons. We as the reader don't learn until the end of Empire of Storms. But in the end of Empire of Storms, when Maeve is doing her huge download of, I made Rowan believe that this other woman was his mate, but it was actually you all along. Aelin thinks how she's actually known since Rowan got hurt in Queen of Shadows, and she goes absolutely feral, very similar to how Feyre acts when Rhys is hurt. Now, but again, it's not the mating bond snapping into place. It's when she realizes, oh my God, this man who's already had a mate is actually my mate. What the hell? And then obviously we learn everything at the end of Empire of Storms.
So now let's look at the Crescent City world and how mating bonds work there. It's a little bit like, we're mates. In all seriousness, though, it is not quite as primal or soul-binding as the other 2 Maas worlds.
Now, they do have their laying in bed, I don't know, maybe we're mates conversation. While we're discussing mating bonds in all of the Maasverse, on the boat, Bryce and Hunt consummating the mating bond is when it officially... they don't use this language, but it's when it officially clicks, I'll say. Quote, they filled with iridescent light. He filled with light. They both fill with light of the starborn Fae, which got me thinking. Actually, not thinking. I legit gasped reading this part of the book, so much so that Brett was in the kitchen and I was at the counter, and he turned around like he needed to fight a bear for me. Like he was so afraid that something happened. In chapter 55 of A Court of Mist and Fury, Feyre glows, quote, warm white like the sun, like a star. And Rhys is a descendant of Thea, the starborn Fae line. Could this glow technically be a gift from Rhys? The like a star language is so interesting here. From Celine's download in House of Flame and Shadow, she had a son with the High Lord of the Night Court, aka her mate, and she bound that son to the Dusk Court prison. Quote from Celine, no one knew that infant who sometimes glowed with starlight had inherited it from me, and that it was the light of the evening star, the Dusk Star. When Feyre asks Rhys if her glow was from the Day Court, he says, quote, I don't care. Now, it's not like, I don't care. It's like, I don't care. I'm so in love with you right now. That's not on my mind. He doesn't confirm it. So when Feyre says about Helion and Akawar, quote, his powers that made me glow whenever Rhys and I were tangled with each other, and every heartbeat ached with mirth. This also just might be her assumption, because later in chapter 55, Feyre thinks, quote, I think the light pouring out of me might have been starlight. I think these are Rhys's powers. I don't think these are Helion's.
I'm so excited as we are introduced to Helion, because I honestly just can't remember if he does have that glowing possibility. I know that he does like emanate sunlight and all of that, but I'm going to be so curious about the language, because I love that you're so right about that starlight language there and how she's glowing like a star and the starborn Fae. And yep.
The thing that locked this into place for me is the Celine download. No one knew the infant that sometimes glowed like a star with starlight. Literally, Feyre says, the powers within me might have been starlight. Like, it's the same words. Wow, Lexi.
We did it.
We did it. This feels so surreal. Like we did it.
I know. I feel like we just climbed a mountain. Like I know that we're about to get to like the climax of this book, but that right there, like, I feel like
I know. Everything feels like a cakewalk in ACOTAR now after we're done with this. I'm going to be eating those words in just a few weeks.
I know, right? Well, friends, next episode, we are going to be covering chapters 56 through 60, RIP Golden Queen and the attack on Valaris. And we are down to our last 2 episodes of ACOMAF before we immediately dive into ACOWAR.
Thank you, as always, to our executive producer, Hayden, a.k.a. our sanity manager, a.k.a. editor of this podcast. Thank you so much for putting up with our antics. We love you.
And like I've mentioned a few times already, if you're interested in more content, more community, book club stuff, we have so much going on our Patreon. It is so much fun. Please do consider joining us and supporting the show and Nicole and I's livelihoods.
You can also sign up for our newsletter. The June one will be going out the last week of June, but we include everything from book recommendations, trivia question. We include what Lexi and I are both up to. So you can sign up for our newsletter in the link in the show notes. Like I said earlier, do not forget to rate and review the show. It takes 5 seconds. It is like the biggest hug you can give to any podcast you listen to. But most importantly, please share this episode with your fellow ACOMAF fan friends. Chapter 54 and 55. Need I say more?
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this really big episode. We appreciate you tuning in and listening to us. Bye. Feyre asks Rhys to tell her everything. And Thrust. That's how I felt the whole time. Like, oh my gosh, I felt like I was like talking with marbles in my mouth for half of it. Like, that's why I have to repeat myself half the time. It's like, that did not come out right.
Was it chicken or cloak today, Lexi?
Oh, it's always cloak.
It's always cloak.
Although I am very hungry right now, so maybe a chicken would be nice.
All right, for some chicken nuggets right now.
Ooh, some dino nuggets. I got plenty of those in my freezer.
So good.